I work at a grocery store that I won't name in Detroit, and I work almost exclusively on the third shift, so thankfully I don't have to deal with customers, and I spend most of my time stacking shelves and doing busy work. It might not sound like a glamorous job, but it's something to earn me a little money while I finish my college degree, which I'm actually set to graduate with honors. Now, it's very, very rare that anything weird happens during the third shift. Some of the workers can be a bit weird, but aren't we all who work at night? No, I'm just projecting, but I usually arrive at the store during closing time, by which all the customers have been tossed out on their butts. I don't know what happened in this particular case. Maybe she was hiding in the bathrooms or tucked away in a display or God knows what. But short version shorter, there was an elderly female customer left in the store with us when it should have been just us workers. Now maybe you'd imagine her wandering around lost or looking for her dead husband or demanding to know where we keep the pasta. Aisle 3, by the way. But no, she snuck through the whole of the store unseen, like solid freaking snake, and none of us had a clue that she was even in the store for the first hour of our shift. Now, the first sign that something was wrong was a sudden foul smell emanating from the fish department. Myself and my colleague Cherry rushed over there, curious as to what had suddenly caused a fish to just go rotten. Had a tuna exploded or something? But nothing could have prepared us for what we saw. The old woman had crawled inside the iced fish display, which was actually due to be emptied by one of us at some point, and she was rolling around inside of it, tearing fish apart with her bare hands and somehow treating them like her worst enemies. We watched in horror and I guess kind of amusement. We could only stare as she saw the goddamn octopus sitting there, some kind of delicacy that they didn't port it in because God knows why. Apparently people eat these things, and squid. And she was muffled by the glass, but we heard her screaming something like, "There you are," at the octopus, and began trying to tear into it. Now, octopi are stretchy and pretty hard to just tear with your hands, so this old lady had the brilliant idea to just sort of gnaw on the octopus with her teeth. Only it turns out that she wore dentures, and after a number of attempts of biting the octopus's tentacles off, she got her dentures stuck in its forehead. Thankfully, someone had called the cops by now who showed up, but it was like nobody wanted to intervene. We wanted to see what she'd do next, and unfortunately, what that involved was smashing her way out of the glass cabinet housing the fish, creating an even more disgusting smell as she charged towards us. We soon realized that there was more to it than fish. She'd soiled herself. Now, this might all seem funny to you, and frankly it was right up until this moment. Then, covered in broken glass and bleeding profusely from shards, she lunged at Cherry, tackled her, calling her an octopus woman and accusing her of inserting eels into various orifices, and I think some troll grandson of hers had shown her some of the famous shock memes and it had just broken her brain. And the whole thing ended with the cops having to actually tase her and try to bring her down, but she was having none of it. She somehow withstood the entire taser blast. I guess it was pretty weak since they thought that she was just some old woman. And then she charged back to the fish counter, grabbed as much seafood as she could carry, and then jumped on Cherry again. Now the next thing we know, she's trying to force an entire octopus down Cherry's throat while whipping me with some eel, and I know it sounds funny as hell, but it was honestly terrifying at the time. The fish were pierced with broken glass, and she was forcing broken glass down Cherry's throat, and she was pierced with broken glass herself, meaning that she was cutting Cherry up. And so here's the final kicker. The old woman wasn't an old woman at all. She was an old man who had made a living as a fisherman and lost his livelihood thanks to commercial fishing and grocery stores like ours switching from locally sourced produce. He had dressed as his wife because after he went bankrupt during the Great Fish Recession, she died of a heart attack, and he blamed just about everyone he could, but mostly us. Apparently our store chain had been his biggest local client, and so it ended up being a tragic and horrifying and scary incident. Cherry suffered severe damage and bleeding to her trachea, as well as some scars all over her body from the broken glass, and the store managed to keep almost all mention of it out of the papers, and the poor psychotic fisherman was taken away to spend his remaining years in psychiatric care. I still work at the grocery store on third shift, but hopefully not for much longer after I graduate. Cherry's doing just fine now, but we all insisted that we were not willing to stock imported octopi in the fish counter from there on in. Word of advice: never work in a gas station at night. This might sound kind of dramatic, but I'd rather crawl over broken glass, work down in the sewers, or be Hassan Piker's dog than work night shift at a gas station again. Maybe day shift is better, but my a-hole boss, who I really want to call a slur but don't want to get you demonetized, forced me to work night shift and night shift only. I was a 22-year-old high school dropout who'd spent 6 months in juvie and bounced from foster family to foster family, so I guess I was lucky enough to find work at all. But good God, I am very sure that it wasn't legal to force a 22-year-old to work 5 night shifts a week every week without ever changing to day shifts. And there were a lot of things about Gary's gash and groceries that weren't strictly legal, but I'm not a rat, and Gary's been buried in the ground for nearly 20 years now. Not to mention the fact that I'm now with his daughter and she has my kid on the way, so I gotta play nice. So I'm not trying to sound like some jerk here, but Lana, Gary's daughter, is the one baiting me to write this right now. I'm actually a very nice guy in my personal life, and I'm gonna pop the question to Lana before our baby boy is born. You know, what's a better place for a proposal than a freaking Let's Read video? Lana, you make me the happiest I'd ever been, and I can't wait to raise our son with you. Now, through the power of Joel of the Golden Voice, I'm asking, will you marry me? Now, let's quickly move on to the story in case she says no. If she says yes, though, well, this will be the first serious proposal you performed on the channel, and I hope so. Now anyways, the point is, Gary was a greasy, greedy dude, and let's just say that I'm glad Lana inherited certain things from her Catholic mother rather than certain things from her father. But enough about that. We had some absolutely effing weirdos who dropped in during the night shift. There was this one guy who would spend a sickening amount of money on scratch cards, and I don't think he ever won a single cent. And from the way he dressed, he was clearly trailer trash too, and a few times I remember saying, "Buddy, do you think you should cool it with the gambling? I'm genuinely concerned about you." And you know how he responded? He hissed at me. Not even a word, he just hissed. After 3 times of that, I just gave up. So there was that scratch-off jack-off, and then there was the 7-foot-tall man who came in at precisely 2 a.m. every day and bought a single Red Bull, a pack of Marlboro Lights, and one of those massive pickles in the plastic packets. Just those 3 items every single time. And the guy looked like he was about 90 as well, and sure, he was a skinny mofo, but there was absolutely no way that I was questioning him on his purchases, especially not after the hissing gambler. Now finally we had this kid, and he looked about maybe 8 tops, who would come in at around 5 in the morning every single Tuesday and Thursday, and would ask if we had any X-Men trading cards for sale. And I explained to him every single time that we didn't sell trading cards of any kind, but that didn't put him off. He'd be there every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, and when I told him no, he looked so upset and despondent, really. And so one day I went to the local comic shop and just got like 6 little packs of X-Men trading cards, and when the kid came in next, I presented him with the packs because surely one of them was the right brand that he was looking for. And the kid looked at the pack of cards, called me a retard, and then threw the packs back at me and stormed out. Now to this day I have no idea what I did wrong. The guy in the comic store told me that these were all X-Men trading cards that existed, but I guess I really don't know what I guess, but I never saw the kid again anyway, and that was kind of a relief. And I'm pretty sure that in the future someone met this kid, and he was the inspiration for that duck song about the lemonade and the grapes, and if you know, you know, Google it. Now speaking of kids and short people, it's time to start the creepiest of these stories. I'm standing at the counter, minding my own business, when I just hear this rich, deep voice demand that I cook him a hot dog because all the ones on the machine are overcooked and look like crap. I glance over and, yeah, fair enough. The hot dogs had been on rotation for about 3 days if I knew Gary, so a fresh batch wasn't out of the question. The problem was, I had no idea where the request had come from. The voice demanded that I get a move on and said that he didn't have all day. And so I leaned over the counter, trying to get a better view of the store, and that's when I saw a little person standing as close to the counter as he could get without face planting. Now, I'll admit I was a little thrown that he'd decided to position himself somewhere that would clearly not be visible to me, but whatever. Now, I apologized profusely and said that I had no idea that he was a little person. And the guy just sort of harumphed and huffed and said that calling him a little person was deeply offensive. And so in my infinite wisdom, I apologized again and said, "I'm sorry, I meant midget." And I saw his face go red with fury, and I knew that I messed up. Now, I scoured my mind. What else did small folk like to be called? Now, this was back in the 80s, so the differences weren't as well known then. And the man explained that he had dwarfism, and so obviously I should refer to him as a dwarf. Now, fair enough. I have no problem with that, and I will refer to people however they want. I guess the thing that riled me up is that during my first time in juvie, I took an extremely nasty acid attack to the face, and it left me permanently disfigured and blind in one eye, so I clearly wasn't so intentionally ableist against people with different body types, but that's neither here nor there. I told the dwarf that I would happily make him a new hot dog if he'd head over to the machine with me so I could cook the wiener to his perfect perfection. And somehow, of course, this managed to offend the fella tremendously again, and he began screaming at me in what sounded like a Shakespearean monologue about how he shouldn't have to move, and it was my job to go and cook him a hot dog with all the trimmings and blah blah blah. No, actually, it wasn't. It was a self-service hot dog machine, but I wasn't going to argue. I told him that I'd head over and cook him up the best hot dog he'd ever had. Now, the dwarf replied by saying that it was too late now. I'd screwed everything up, and it was time to face the consequences. In complete shock, I watched as the little man rose to his full height of around 6 foot. At the same time, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sawed-off shotgun. He told me that if I went for the panic alarm or anything like that, he'd blast a hole in my chest the size of a foot-long hot dog. And you know what? Screw it. Screw Gary. I wasn't getting killed over a job that barely paid enough for me to live and forced me to work 5 nights a week at Gary's. And I told the now 6-foot dwarf to chill and emptied the register for him. He filled a bag that he'd produced from nowhere and gave me a very cruel smile and just strutted out of the gas station. Or he almost did. For some reason, he paused to unload a shotgun round into the hot dog station and blasting that thing into pieces, leaving my ears ringing, and then he left. Now, my heart was pounding harder than it had when I'd done 4 lines of, well, never mind. Immediately, I pressed the panic button and I called 911 for good measure. Screw Gary. Those cops could actually wake him up. And so when the cops got here, we discovered a bunch of things. 1, Gary was too cheap to actually buy an outdoor security camera, so that one was actually fake. And so we had absolutely no footage of this fake dwarf leaving the premises. However, the interior cameras did work and I was able to see how he'd tricked me. He'd been kneeling on shoes, positioned in a perfect practice pose, so I had no chance of seeing his real legs. This explains why he didn't want to accompany me to the hot dog machine, though. And hilariously, this fake dwarf had been the suspect in a bunch of local robberies. He'd never fired his weapon before, and you know what got him caught? The fact that he took the time to shoot the crap out of that hot dog oven. Now, they were able to trace that buckshot of the gun to the owner and get his ass busted. He'd robbed enough places that I'm pretty sure that he'd actually die behind bars. What a shame. And as for me, I got my ass absolutely chewed out by Gary for handing over the cash and not risking my life by grabbing the baseball bat under the counter. I quit on the spot. I got my life together and I went back to school. I graduated, then got a degree, and some years later I met a woman that I fell head over heels for. Now imagine how shocked I was when I discovered that she was Gary's daughter, and hated him even more than I did. We originally bonded over drinks, where she shared our glee that he was dead, and now I know I sound like an ass, but you didn't know the man. He wanted me to die rather than hand over $200 or so to a fake dwarf. Screw Gary, screw the fake dwarf. I work in a very lucrative field now, and my life's freaking awesome. And that's why I'm writing to another awesome person, you, Let's Read, and I hope you enjoyed my story of a bunch of weirdos, at least one of whom nearly murdered me. And if you didn't, well, I know people who will shove a hot dog where the sun don't shine. Have a beautiful day. Hi, Joel. I grew up in Britain, although my parents are French. You'd never know it, though, because I have the most posh, London-sounding accent that a French girl could ever have. This might be because of the school that I went to, or because I left school in college, and I took some time out before university to work as an air hostess. I loved that job and ended up staying in the air for 5 years. Not literally, of course, but you get what I mean. I left sixth form college in 1997, and the story that I'm about to share with you took place in 1999. This was a couple of years before, everything changed with the planes, and security was very different back then. Things were a lot more lax, and it was much easier to get up to high hijinks. For one thing, you could still join the Mile High Club without too much trouble. Not that I ever did that, of course. I honestly would never. I shouldn't joke about that kind of thing, considering the story that I'm about to share with you, or joke about anything, really. So this story took place on the first ever red-eye flight that I was working. I'm sure everyone knows what a red-eye flight is by this point, but if by some small chance you don't, it's a flight, generally a shorter one, that takes place at night and often involves the passengers sleeping for the duration. If you take the red-eye, you're meant to stay quiet, calm, and well-behaved. I can't remember if kids were flat-out banned from our red-eye flights, but I don't ever remember any kids or babies on the handful that I worked. Now, this was 27 years ago, so bear with me. I've not worked as an air hostess for almost as long, and I haven't thought about planes in a long time. From what I can recall, the plane, run by some long bankrupt airline that you probably never heard of, was divided into 2 sections. The front section, closer to the cockpit, was for passengers who wanted to stay quiet and chill but weren't intending to sleep. It was the cheaper option and usually the busier one. Then the back of the plane, in reverse of the usual, was sort of the first class section, except this was for people who wanted or needed to sleep, so it was filled with bed seats. I was working up front, which suited me just fine because I didn't want to tiptoe around snoring old businessmen. And the sleeping area always smelled like farts too, so that was lovely. A red-eye typically doesn't have as many flight attendants as a regular flight, or at least it didn't back then. I think there were just 3 of us on that flight, although I could be misremembering. What I do remember is that I was up front, obviously, and my dear, queer, gentle friend Adam was working the sleeper section. Do you remember H from Steps? I don't know if Steps was that big in the United States, so maybe you never knew him, Joel, but if not, Google him and stick a picture up on screen if you can. Adam looked just like H from Steps, only he was a lot calmer, quieter, and more gentle than H, who always seemed like he had the energy of 50 men. Now make sure you Google H from Steps and not his real name, Ian Watkins, otherwise you might get that nunce from Lost Prophets, another singer who unfortunately shared a name. Now, he did some really, really terrible things, and you should do a true crime story about him one day, actually. That'd be actually very interesting. He was shanked in prison recently, too. Died. What a tragedy. Now, anyways, Adam was like a really calm and gentle H from Steps, and I promise this is important eventually. Partly it's important because the villain of this story, who we'll call Ian, looked kind of like the Lost Prophets guy. Although he wasn't really famous at the time and we didn't know he was a major criminal, so maybe I'm just misremembering. I'll call him Ian anyway because nearly every guy called Ian I've ever met was a proper prick, if you get me. Except for my cousin Ian, who's an actual right laugh. So anyways, back to the red-eye. Because I was working at the front of the plane, most of the passengers ate late-night airline food, and that meant that it was my job to collect up the trays with their rubbish on them. Now, I did this on autopilot, pun intended, sticking them on my trolley with a little "thank you, sir," or "thank you, ma'am," or "thank you, lovely," if they were some old biddy who was so wrinkled that they could have been a lad or a lass, or how do I put this tactfully? Someone who was very, very large and made it impossible to tell their gender. Now anyways, you had to be really careful about that back then. Christ, I feel bad for air hostesses in the 2020s. And I bet there had to have been some actual moments where a 20-year-old sweetheart had called a bearded passenger sir and been chewed out for not recognizing that they were a pretty princess. Oh Christ, I shouldn't have had those last couple of glasses of wine before writing you this email. Now anyways, I got my trolley full of trays and crap to the center of the plane and began chucking away the plastic boxes that the dinner had come in. And that's when I noticed it. A napkin with writing scrawled across the whole thing. "I know what you did on that plane," they'd written. And then a crude picture of what was definitely supposed to be me because, well, I could just tell, okay? Now, there had only been about 7 or 8 passengers who'd had dinner, so the note couldn't have come from too many people. I don't know why I even cared because I hadn't done anything on any plane by that point, but the drawing had been very rude and insulting, and I was young, so I guess I felt kind of threatened by it. It didn't take long for me to notice Ian, even in the low, dim lights of the red-eye flight. Now, he was a guy about my age with slicked back hair and a goatee that made him look like a proper wrong'un. Now, he kept giving me the evils, looking at me like I was a bit of dog poo on the sole of a shoe, but then also sometimes like he wanted to lick it. Now, I'm going to stop this comparison there because I'm squeaking myself out, but you get the idea. I was disgusted by him, but he still wanted a piece of that, you know? And so I guess he was watching when I was looking, and he saw me looking, and then he started calling me over and asking for things like, "Hey girl, can I get a bottle of water?" Or, "Got any napkins? I seem to have lost mine." And my favorite, "Way up, whoa lass, can you handle these nuts for me? Haven't had any complimentary airline peanuts yet. So, can you get them?" And that's what he said, word for word, and I swear on the Bible about it. As an air hostess back then, at the dodgy flight company I worked for, you were taught to always smile, be as flirty as possible, and take as much crap from passengers as you could tolerate. I remember once, before this red-eye, I got chewed out for telling a passenger off after he touched my butt, and he said it was an accident and apologized, so apparently I was in the wrong for muttering perv under my breath as I walked off. Now anyway, after I gave Ian his nuts, he called me back again about 10 minutes later and said that they really were salty, and then he asked me if I liked salty things, which I pointedly ignored. And so he just laughed and said he needed another bottle of water and asked if I could be a good girl and go fetch him one. Of course, I did just that. What I didn't realize was that Ian got right out of his seat and followed me into the middle of the plane, where we kept things like bottled water and complimentary peanuts. The bathrooms were nearby, so at first I wasn't alarmed by the sensation that someone had followed me. Unfortunately, it was Ian, and he wasn't headed to the bathroom. Instead, he grabbed me, pinned me against the wall, and shoved some kind of hand towel against my mouth to gag me. And then he leaned in close and started whispering in my ear about what a terrible person I was. He didn't say it exactly like that, obviously. He said some proper vile stuff. Stuff that now, as a grandmother in my early 50s, I'd give a lad a good lick in the dick for. But back then, though, I was just a little wee thing and I was terrified. I started crying almost immediately, and Ian was all cruel and callous, saying that I brought this on myself, and he said I'd betrayed him after what I did on the last flight, and asked how I was okay with throwing away 7 years of our relationship. And that's when I realized that this guy somehow believed that I was someone totally different, specifically his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, who was also apparently an air hostess and had cheated on him on a flight. I didn't know it at the time, but his brain was absolutely fried from a cocktail of alcohol, MDMA, and coke, which I guess explains his temporary insanity. And things escalated when he tried to force me into the bathroom, pushing the hand towel so deep into my throat that I couldn't even try to scream. None of the passengers were turning around, and it was just me and Ian and a curtain separating us from the sleeper section. Now, the best I managed was slapping the wall, trying to do some type of SOS. I got maybe 2 short slaps in before Ian grabbed me between the legs over my skirt and squeezed in a way that made it very clear that he'd do worse if I kept going. I guess my beloved friend H heard the slapping because suddenly I saw all 5'5" of him peeking through the curtain. And then, holy God, he stormed toward Ian. And then, holy God, he yanked him off of me. My gentle, sweet buddy H didn't hesitate. He smashed his forehead into Ian's face, and the crunch of a bone sounded like a gunshot in that silent plane. And then H was yelling that a man was trying to assault his colleague. And H absolutely bodied him. It turned out he was a brown belt in Krav Maga. He floored Ian in seconds, tied him up with plastic ties, and even broke bones in his foot when Ian tried to kick out. Ian spent the next 3 hours hog-tied in an out-of-order bathroom next to a toilet full of poop. We radioed ahead, and police were waiting at Heathrow. This Ian guy was arrested immediately, and after that, things changed. I became more cautious, I went to therapy eventually, and I gained a whole new respect for H. I stayed in the job for another 3 years and then left, and life moved on. But I'll never forget the terror of that night, or the man who saved me.
I'd like to start off by saying that Christmas is my all-time favorite holiday. However, every year, I remember what happened to my family on Christmas of 2019. I was 12 years old at the time. That year we went to my cousin's house to celebrate Christmas. It was a very fun night, and we enjoyed each other's company. We decided to stay at my cousin's house for the night and leave early the next day. We settled down in the guest bedroom and soon fell asleep. Suddenly I woke up at 4 a.m., hearing noises coming from downstairs. Against my better judgment, I decided to go check it out. As quietly as I could, I crept down the stairs and looked through the wooden railings into the living room. I saw a figure that appeared to be dressed as Santa, looking under the Christmas tree. I went back upstairs and woke up my dad. "Hey Dad, Santa came back. He's downstairs." After my dad became fully awake, he seemed alarmed by what I said. We went downstairs to find no one inside the house. My dad told me that I might have just had a bad dream, and we went back to bed. The next morning, when everyone woke up and was getting ready to eat breakfast, my uncle went down to the basement to grab some drinks, when he noticed that one of the basement windows was completely shattered. After the initial shock, my dad and uncle checked the whole house to see if anything was missing or damaged. After they were done searching, they rejoined us in the kitchen. But before they could say anything, a loud crash came from the one place that wasn't checked: the attic. My dad and uncle immediately ran upstairs to check it out. A shouting match followed. We all ran outside and the police were called. When the cops arrived, the officers quickly ran inside the house. A short time later, they brought a man dressed as Santa outside. We later found out that the man had a large knife on him. The officer stated that it wasn't just my cousin's house that was broken into. There were multiple reports of break-ins up and down the block. Before I end this story, there was something that I overheard the cops saying that might be entirely unrelated to this break-in. Apparently they had been dealing with attempted kidnappings of young children at the local mall, with perpetrators dressed as Santa. This story happened in 2016. At the time I was living on my own in an apartment with my dog, finishing up college. That Christmas, my dad was only 350 miles or so away from me, 2 states away, as opposed to being over 2,000 miles away in my home state. So my mom flew in, and I drove in with my dog so we could spend Christmas together. The trip there in the first week was great. It was my first time living away from home, so it was nice to be with my parents again. However, the day before Christmas Eve, my mom found out that my dad was having an affair. And that kind of threw a wrench into things, needless to say. They fought all day into Christmas Eve. I got fed up quick, but I had driven there, so all I had to do was go in my car and drive back home. My parents were upset when they saw me repacking my car. It was now 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve, but I didn't really care. I'd rather spend my Christmas on the road than be in the middle of this drama. There was a lot of snow, but the weather had slowed down for the past few days, so I knew that the roads would be clear, and my car had 4-wheel drive. So I set off, and spent the first hour of my road trip just angrily venting everything to my dog. I filled up my car before I left, because I knew that the drive from my dad's apartment to my college town would be exactly 1 tank of gas. So whenever I needed to refill again, it would be in a familiar area. About 2 hours in, I wanted to give my dog a bathroom break to avoid any accidents in my car. That's when I pulled into a deserted rest stop to do just that. I hooked him up to his harness and made sure that I had my keys, phone, and my flashlight. I was cleaning up after him when I realized that he was doing these low, rumbling noises, the sound that dogs make when they see something. And he began kicking up snow with his hind legs. Now is probably a good time to inform you that I don't have a big scary dog. He's a barely 10-pound Yorkie. The Christmas sweater that my mom made for him didn't exactly help him look more intimidating. He may not be a guard dog, but he is a good motion sensor alarm. I looked up to see what he had been barking at, expecting it to be an animal, but it wasn't. There was a distinctly human figure in the distance. Had my dog not alerted me, I would have never noticed. There were not any other cars in this parking lot, and this place was fairly isolated. It was unnerving. I scooped up my dog and went back to my car. Normally when I picked him up, my dog would stop barking at whatever he sees, but that was not the case this time around. He kept squirming in my arms so he could look behind me, and was getting more and more worked up until he was almost clawing at me. When we got to my car, I finally looked back again, and this time, the figure was much closer, because he was full-on sprinting right at my car. I panicked and threw my dog into the passenger seat. I quickly got in and locked my doors. But of course, my car would not start. I had never had this problem before, but the engine was not wanting to turn over. My dog was now in the back seat scratching at the windows and was going insane, barking and growling. The man reached my car. He resembled any other homeless man I had ever seen, with layers of slightly torn jackets, some dirty jeans, with shaggy hair and a beard. He went from his sprint to a slow jog once he got into the parking lot. When he approached my car, he slammed his hands against the driver window.
"I need a ride."
He sounded out of breath, but very monotone. Sorry, no. I'm about to call a tow truck though. If you need a ride, you can get one from him." I knew that I looked and sounded scared, and the man started pounding on my window again with both fists. He said something about being cold and needing a ride into the city, and that it was Christmas Eve. But at this point I had stopped paying attention to him and was just focusing on trying to get my dog to calm down. He was still losing his mind in the back seat, still barking, growling, and scratching at the window. My dog has never before or since acted this way towards anybody. While he's not very fond of strangers or new people, he's always been the type to basically ignore strangers or any of their attempts to get his attention. So for him to be going crazy like this was a massive red flag for me. I held onto his harness to get him to relax, and I told the man that if he was cold, he could wait in the restroom for the tow truck to arrive. He motioned for me to roll down my window, and I shook my head no. I finally just put my hands over my dog's mouth, shushing him, and told the man that I couldn't help him. He looked angry, and then tried to open my door. Thankfully it wouldn't budge, but it made my dog squirm out of my hands and went full-on ballistic again. I pulled out my phone to dial 911, and the second he realized what I was doing, he stepped back from my car and rushed into the bathrooms. Him leaving made my dog instantly lay down and relax. I explained to the dispatch what was going on. The lady was very nice, and she sent a police officer to the rest stop and agreed to stay on the phone with me until he arrived. The man came out of the restrooms and back towards my car. I began to panic again, but when he came close enough, I assumed that he could still hear me on the phone with the dispatch, and that made him run off in the direction he had originally come from. It took 15 minutes for the officer to find me. When we talked, we agreed that it was super expensive to get a tow truck out here on Christmas Eve, so I ended up deciding to call my parents to tell them that my car had broken down. My dad had a big pickup truck and was able to borrow a trailer from his coworker. The officer allowed my dog to sit in his cruiser to warm up, while he looked around and followed the man's footprints for a while, but ultimately the man had vanished. My parents arrived around 2 hours later, and the officer helped my dad load the car up onto the trailer. I didn't plan on telling my parents anything more than my car had just broken down, but the officer filled them in about what happened anyway. Both of my parents then felt awful about everything, and they decided not to fight anymore, or at least in front of me. My dad was able to fix my car, but I think the entire situation really scared both him and my mom, because they ended up trading my car in for a new one the day after Christmas. They told me to consider it a late Christmas gift and an early graduation present. And my mom insisted on driving home with me when the holidays were over and flying out of my city instead. I never received any updates from the police if they ever saw or heard from that man again. Hopefully he's learned his lesson about harassing people at rest stops.
On Christmas Eve in 1989, I was traveling through Mexico City in my boyfriend's car. He was driving and I was navigating. There were Christmas decorations up along the streets and most of the traffic was moving at a snail's pace, taking care not to hit the dense pockets of people walking up and down the street. We were in a hurry though, so my boyfriend turned off one of the main roads and we cut down a side street to avoid the congestion. We made a few more turns and suddenly stopped when we realized we didn't have a clue where we were. I opened the map while my boyfriend put the car in park and lit up a cigarette. I was tracing our route on the map to backtrack us when something struck our car hard on the front side right next to me. I caught a glimpse of a figure slam into our windshield and bounce forward off the car. I cried out in shock while my boyfriend stuffed his cigarette in the ashtray and stepped out of the car. This is where the experience became strange. I've never shared this before with anyone other than my closest friends and family who I trust. While my boyfriend was climbing out of the car, I saw the figure who struck us stand up awkwardly, holding his head and limp across the street. My boyfriend completely ignored him and bent down to look at the front of the car. I rolled down my window and called out, "Hey!" to the man as he limped away. My boyfriend, thinking I was yelling at him, called back to me, "Don't get out." I called back, "What? Why?" And my boyfriend stood back up and I noticed blood on his pants from where he had knelt down. "He's dead," my boyfriend said, and he rubbed his face. "What? No, he's not, he's..." I turned and started to point in the direction the man had limped away in, but he was gone. I got out of the car and stood up. I saw enough to understand what my boyfriend meant. The man we had struck had flipped off the windshield and caught his head in a storm drain. His neck was very clearly broken and he was bleeding heavily from 2 different compound fractures in his legs where he had struck our car with his bike. The bike itself was lying on its side by my feet, the front wheel bent sideways and the back wheel still spinning. I was in shock and kept jerking my head back and forth down the street the man had limped down on and the figure at my feet. It didn't make sense. They were wearing the exact same clothes. "How many people did we hit?" I asked my boyfriend. He looked at me like I had hit my head. "Only one," he replied. Then he started waving his arms to flag down a police car. I sat down on the sidewalk and stared at the ground, feeling like I was going to be sick. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't seen a ghost because I had seen the shadow of the man cast on the stone wall behind him as he stood up and limped away. But there he was. The exact same man who had stood up right there on the ground in front of our car. The police blocked off the area, examined the bike and our cracked windshield, and determined the guy had been speeding down the hill on his bike and struck us without applying the brakes. They asked me what I saw, and the best that I could do was stammer that it happened so fast. I thought we had hit 2 people. We got a ride from a family member to my boyfriend's house, but I was still in such a state of shock that I couldn't even touch the dinner that had been prepared for us. People have since asked if the man who stood up was bloody or if I could see the whites of his eyes. Honestly, I don't recall seeing either. All I could say with certainty is that he stood up, held his right hand to his head and limped away. He didn't react to my boyfriend stepping out of the car. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or life after death, but if that's the case, this man was physically reacting to the impact that had killed him, seeming not to have noticed that he was dead. Occasionally I dream about that night and that impact, but in the dream I never see the man stand back up. I see a bright flash of light and then nothing. No details of the man himself after the hit. I never even found out the man's name. It was the worst Christmas of my life.
My goal in writing this out isn't to have it shrugged off as just another entertaining online horror story. I sincerely want to know if this experience or anything similar has happened to anyone else. That may help me sleep better at night, knowing that it's not all just in my head. I'll admit that I suffer from PTSD, but this is so much different from anything else that I've ever experienced during one of my episodes. Last Christmas, my friends and I had planned to meet at our hunting cabin and have a rustic holiday detached from the rest of the world. We were planning on just lighting a fire, having some drinks, listening to some music, and playing some cards. I arrived at the cabin first, just as the sun was starting to set. The cabin was set alone on the top of a rocky slope overlooking the highway, so I turned on all the lights so it could be seen from the road. I got the fire going and threw the beer into the icebox to chill. It had snowed the night before, so after I warmed up the cabin, I went outside and shoveled some openings by the driveway for the cars to park in. The entire time I was outside, I had that feeling that I wasn't alone. Not necessarily that I was being watched, but that someone else was on the property. I shook it off as paranoia. Unless they were here for the cabin, there was no reason to be this far up the hill. There was nothing else around except for trees and power lines. I went back inside and noticed a couple of missed calls on my cell phone. My friends had called me to tell me that they were on their way, and that they would be there within the hour. I got the food going in the oven, and brought in some more firewood. I had been sitting down for about half a minute, putting my feet up when I heard knocking at the window. It was a harsh rapping, clearly someone that was trying to get my attention. I paused and looked up. The noise hadn't come from the window around front. It came from the back window near the kitchen sink. It was the exact opposite direction that someone should be approaching from. That side of the cabin faced the woods. I stood up slowly and walked over to the window and peered out, half expecting to see one of my friends pranking me, but there was no one at the window. I peered out across the small area behind the cabin, and I couldn't see any movement. I walked over to the back door and opened it, shining a flashlight out into the misty gloom, and by the trees, I noticed an outline of a figure. I called out, "Hey!" and took 4 steps out into the snow when I stopped. The crunching of the snow beneath my feet was as loud as fireworks, and I glanced down at the tracks I made leading away from the front door. Then I slowly turned the flashlight beam over to the spot beneath the kitchen window. There was no tracks at all. For about 10 seconds I just stood there, looking back and forth between the trees and the window. I then turned around and marched back inside, slamming the door behind me. I set the flashlight down, furious with myself, convinced I was having another episode, sensing danger where there was none, being distracted by stray shadows and sounds. I sat back down in the chair by the fire as another rapping sound came from the front door. I heaved a sigh of relief, presuming that some of my friends had arrived. I stood up and opened the door. There was nothing. None of my friends were at the door. No cars parked in the yard. No footprints in the snow. I felt a cold sensation sink into the pit of my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. Someone was out there, taunting me, distracting me maybe, keeping my attention away from the other side of the house. I was suddenly convinced that someone was trying to break in. I grabbed my sidearm from my bag and picked up the flashlight again, and I searched both bedrooms, the bathroom, and the small closet where the water heater was kept, clearing any place where anyone could be hiding, making sure all the windows were locked. As I moved back into the living room, I glanced out the side window and saw the shadow of an adult man, maybe 5'7", cast itself across the front lawn by the glow of the porch light. I had him now. I flung open the front door and pointed my weapon. But again, there was nothing. No figure, not a whisper of movement, and no footprints in the snow. I held my ground. I wasn't crazy. That hadn't been the shadow of a tree. It had been a person. Head, neck, shoulders, and torso. I knew it had been. I scanned the yard with my flashlight, going over every inch. No footprints except for my own. The back door then slammed behind me. It didn't shutter. It didn't swing shut. It slammed. I spun around and nearly fired off a shot. I then sprinted to the back door, flung it open, and aimed, only to be greeted by the single set of footprints I had made before. I shut both doors and locked them, shut off all the lights until the place was only illuminated by the fire. I put my gun in the filing cabinet, locked it, then dropped the key in a jar. I sat there by the firelight for another 25 minutes, listening to pounding noises from various windows from across the cabin, forcing myself to ignore them and remain calm. I didn't catch a glimpse of any other shadows from outside, but I wasn't really looking. I saw the headlights of my friend's car pull in. I stood up, turned all the lights back on, and greeted them at the door as if nothing was wrong. For the rest of the night, I drank with my friends and kept a smile on my face, not giving any indication that anything was wrong. We decorated a mini tree and played cards and had fun. That night, I slept on the couch and ignored the sound of footsteps walking across the roof. Now, I would have dismissed all of this as just being in my head, and I wouldn't have taken the time to write it down and share it with you if it wasn't for what happened the next morning. I was making coffee, and my buddy came back inside after having a morning cigarette. His wife calls out to him from the bedroom and asked him if he saw anything. I asked what they were talking about, and he replied, "We heard the sounds of footsteps on the roof last night, but there were no footprints up there through the snow."
The best story my grandfather ever told me happened back when he was 18 years old on Christmas Eve in 1959. He was lying on his couch with a broken leg, which was perched on the arm of the couch, all wrapped up in a cast. He was listening to the radio and watching the snow fall outside as he used the poker to adjust the wood in the fire. It was about 8 p.m. and he was alone in the house. His family lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, and his father and brothers were across the property in the barn, roughly about a mile away. He doesn't recall where his mother was. He was reading something in the newspaper about President Eisenhower when there came a furious pounding at the door. An enraged voice screamed from the other side of the door that Owen, my great-grandfather, was going to die tonight. My grandfather didn't respond to this. Unable to move off the couch, he pulled the rug across the room until the shotgun which had been leaning against the fireplace was in reach, and he picked it up and cocked it, pointing it towards the front door. My grandfather says for the next 5 to 10 minutes, the man continued screaming, circling the house and pounding on windows, screaming for Owen to come out. He was clearly drunk and out of his mind and wasn't leaving the house until someone opened up. My grandfather winced as the man banged on the window right above the couch, but he still didn't move or acknowledge him. Finally, the man returned to the front door and pounded on it until he kicked it in. My grandfather said that he felt the blast of cold air and the stench of tobacco and whiskey as the man stomped through the dark hallway and walked right into the living room. He was a tall, lanky guy with brown teeth and an uneven gray beard, like he had only shaved part of his face. The guy's eyes were as big as hubcaps and he was barefoot, which was crazy as it was snowing outside. For about 10 seconds, the guy didn't even notice my grandfather, but was glancing around the room quickly, his eyes darting back and forth like a rat until his eyes fell upon the couch. He saw my grandfather, he saw the shotgun, and he froze like a deer in the headlights. My grandfather cocked the hammer back on one of the barrels. He had him dead to rights, and the intruder knew it. My grandfather snapped. The man took a step back, looking more enraged than afraid. "Where's Owen?" he hissed. "Get out!" my grandfather yelled. The guy turned around, walked into the kitchen, and dug through the pantry until he found a pint of whiskey. He even turned around and looked back into the living room just to make sure the shotgun was still up. He threw back the whiskey, dropped the bottle in the sink, and walked out, calling back over his shoulder, "Tell Owen I said Merry Christmas." Once the guy was outside, my grandfather heard him knock over the pile of firewood by the steps. After another minute, he smelled smoke and realized the guy had set fire to the pile, likely intending to burn the house down. My grandfather hobbled over awkwardly, shotgun still up, barely able to hold it straight on his bad leg, and peered outside. The guy was gone, but there was so much snow around the fire and so much icy wind assaulting it that the fire was already nearly out. When Owen and the others got back and saw the charred marks on the front stairs, they asked what happened, and my grandfather told them everything. Owen flew into a rage, took the shotgun, and followed the guy's tracks out across the fields with a lantern. He didn't come back until Christmas morning when the family was all gathered in the kitchen for breakfast. Owen tossed the gun down and hissed that the fucking thing hadn't even been loaded. When my grandfather asked if he got him, Owen nodded and responded, "Oh yes." And that was it. He never got my great-grandfather Owen to report exactly what happened or even know how he knew the man. My grandfather said that he never saw the stranger ever again. I asked him if he thought Owen had killed him, and he responded, "I'm almost positive that he did." When I asked, "But how did he do it with no ammo in the gun?" my grandfather looked back at me and said, "There's dozens of ways to kill a man with your hands."
This didn't happen to me, but a close friend of mine. To avoid any confusion, I will write the story from his perspective. This happened several years ago when I was about 14. My family planned a weekend getaway to visit my uncle in Maine. We would stay in a cabin because my uncle's house was too small to accommodate everyone. We arrived at the cabin on a Thursday night and planned on staying until Sunday. It was Christmas Eve when we got there. I'll give you a brief layout of the cabin. It was a small, single-story ranch-style house with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a dining room, an outdoor balcony, and 1 bathroom. We unpacked our belongings and settled in for the night. The next morning, we headed to my uncle's house and spent the entire day there. We helped prepare a Christmas dinner and had a small fire going outside. After a long day of celebration, we drove back to the cabin, extremely exhausted. I got washed up and ready for bed. However, once I exited the bathroom, I felt a dreadful sensation come over me, an uneasiness in the pit of my stomach. It felt as though something was in the cabin with us. As a side note, I'll mention that I'm a firm believer in the paranormal. I cautiously made my way towards the dining room. When I entered, I looked towards the back of the room where the window was. The moonlight outside had bled into the room, casting a dim glow. When my eyes adjusted, I then saw a dark figure standing in the corner. A pair of red eyes stared into my soul with malicious intent. My next actions are inexplicable. I still have trouble understanding what happened to me when I go back to that night. But I calmly walked towards the bedroom and ignored whatever was hiding in the dining room. I still can't explain it. I should have been mortified, but it was almost like my brain went into autopilot. I eventually woke up at exactly 2:17 a.m. to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. I could have passed it off as one of my parents grabbing a drink, but the footsteps were slow and deliberate, getting louder and louder as they approached my bedroom. My worst fears came true when I heard my bedroom door slowly creak open. I ducked under the covers, hoping that the thing would just leave. But my prayers fell on deaf ears as I felt something sit at the end of my bed. There then came a low, menacing growl. I quickly shot up like a firecracker had just gone off inside my pants. I caught a brief glimpse of a black silhouette with piercing red eyes sitting at the edge of my bed. I then bolted out of the door, screaming for my parents. After calming me down, they asked what the commotion was all about. I told them about the thing that I saw in my bedroom, but of course, there was nothing there now. I was baffled because I knew exactly what I saw. I'm not crazy. I know the difference between nightmares and reality. It's hard to explain the kind of fear you experience when you see something with your own 2 eyes that you know should not be there. My parents did the obligatory lecturing about having a nightmare and brushing off any possibility of a paranormal event. We continued our stay until Sunday and left for home. To this day, I have no idea what I saw in the cabin that night, and I will not be returning to find out.
When my dad and I moved into the small apartment, it was supposed to be a temporary solution while our house underwent renovations. We were adjusting to our new surroundings in the apartment complex, which for the most part was pretty quiet. Most of our neighbors kept to themselves, and life was uneventful, except for one family that lived a couple of doors down from us. The family consisted of a mother and her 2 adult children, a son and a daughter, both in their 20s. From the moment we moved in, it was clear that their household was far from peaceful. It seemed like every other day their arguments would spill out into the common areas of the complex. The son, a tall, muscular guy with a constant scowl, and his sister, a petite woman with an equally fiery temper, were always at each other's throats. Their mother, a weary-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes, often tried to mediate, but her efforts were usually in vain. Despite the frequent disturbances, my dad and I tried to mind our own business. After all, we were only going to be there for a few months, and it didn't seem worth getting involved in someone else's family drama. But all of that changed on one sunny afternoon when the arguments escalated into something far more dangerous. I remember the day vividly. It was a lazy Saturday and I was in my room, trying to focus on a book I'd been meaning to finish. My dad was in the living room tinkering with some electronics, his favorite pastime. It was the usual sounds of the apartment complex. Distant conversations, footsteps, the hum of the appliances providing a comforting background noise. Suddenly, the familiar sound of yelling pierced the tranquility. I sighed and tried to ignore it, thinking it was just another one of their routine arguments. But this time the yelling was different. It was more urgent, more desperate. I put down my book and walked over to the window, curiosity getting the better of me. What I saw next made my blood run cold. The mother and daughter were outside backing away from the building with terrified expressions on their faces. The son was following them, his face twisted in rage, and in his hand he held a large kitchen knife. He was shouting something unintelligible, but his intentions were clear. "Dad!" I yelled, my voice cracking with the panic. "Come here, quick!" My dad rushed to my side and looked out the window. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. Without a moment's hesitation, he grabbed his phone and bolted for the door. I followed close behind, my heart pounding in my chest. By the time we reached the footpath outside, the situation had escalated even further. The son was now only a few feet away from his mother and sister, who were backed up against the wall with nowhere to go. My dad, who had always been a man of action, didn't waste any time. He lunged at the son, grabbing his arm in an attempt to wrestle the knife away. "Call the police!" he shouted over his shoulder at me. I fumbled my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. My dad and the son were now locked in a struggle, the knife glinting in the sunlight as they fought for control. The mother and daughter watched in horror, too stunned to move.
911, what's your emergency?
The operator's voice crackled through the phone. "There's a man with a knife attacking his family. My dad's trying to stop him. We need help now," I blurted out, giving our address as quickly as I could. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but every second felt like an eternity. I watched in terror as my dad managed to pin the son to the ground, finally prying the knife away from his grasp. The son, surprisingly, didn't really resist much after that. He laid there breathing heavily as my dad yelled at him to stay down. Moments later, the sounds of sirens filled the air, and several police cars screeched to a halt in front of the complex. Officers rushed out, guns drawn, and then quickly took control of the situation. They handcuffed the son and led him away, still seething with anger but not putting up a fight. The mother and daughter then collapsed to the ground, now sobbing with relief. My dad, his face pale and his hands trembling, handed the knife over to one of the officers. I stood there still clutching my phone, feeling a mixture of fear and admiration for my father's bravery. One of the officers approached us and took our statements. The mother, once she had composed herself enough to speak, explained that her son had severe anger issues. She told us that he had been struggling for years, and this wasn't the first time he had become violent. She expressed her gratitude to my dad for stepping in and possibly saving their lives. As the police drove the son away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of uneasiness. What if he came back? What if the situation escalated even further next time? These thoughts swirled in my mind as we returned to our apartment, the adrenaline slowly wearing off. For the next few days, the apartment complex was unusually quiet. The usual sounds of life had been replaced by an eerie silence, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The mother and daughter kept to themselves, rarely leaving their apartment. About a month later, we noticed the son had returned. He looked different, more subdued, almost resigned. The mother had mentioned that he was undergoing treatment, but it was hard to believe that a month away could make such a drastic change. Surprisingly, there were no more arguments or yelling matches. The family seemed to have settled into a fragile peace, and the complex slowly returned to its normal state. But the incident had left a lasting impression on me. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change, and how important it was to be prepared for the unexpected. As for my dad and I, our bond grew stronger after that day. I had always admired him, but seeing him in action, risking his own safety to protect others, well, it made me realize just how lucky I was to have him. Our time in the apartment was temporary, but the lessons we learned and the experiences we shared during those months would stay with us forever. Eventually, the renovations on our house were completed, and it was time to move back home. As we packed up our belongings and prepared to leave the apartment, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The apartment complex, once just a temporary home, had become a place of growth and learning for me. I looked out the window one last time, taking in the familiar view of the footpath and the rows of the connected houses. The memory of that fateful afternoon was still fresh in my mind, but now it was tempered with a sense of resilience and hope. Life was unpredictable, but with my dad by my side, I knew that we could face whatever challenges came our way. As we drove away, I glanced back at the apartment complex, a small smile playing on my lips. It had been a place of turmoil and fear, but also of courage and strength, and I know no matter where life took us next, I would always carry those lessons with me, ready to face the future with a newfound sense of confidence and determination. My name is Bob, and I've been a fan of this channel for a long time. I'm an older viewer, probably a lot older than most. I'm almost 70 years old now, but the story I want to share happened when I was just 10 years old. Back in the summer of '64, I had a job delivering milk around my neighborhood. Yes, I'm that old. It was a quiet suburb with neat lawns, picket fences, and cozy homes. Every morning before dawn, I would load up my bicycle with clinking glass bottles and pedal through the serene streets. One thing that set our neighborhood apart: the mysterious Mr. Franklin who lived at the end of Elderberry Lane. His house was an old Victorian with dark curtains always drawn. Rumors said that he rarely came out during the day, preferring the cover of night for his activities. I noticed Mr. Franklin during my third week on the milk route. After leaving milk on Miss Thompson's doorstep, another local in the neighborhood, I had felt a shiver down my spine. Turning around, I saw him, Mr. Franklin, standing in his overgrown garden, his pale face framed by messy gray hair. His unsettling smile made my heart race. From then on, I always felt his eyes on me during my deliveries. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of him behind his curtains or see his figure under a street lamp. It seemed that he was always watching but never approaching. As time passed, Mr. Franklin's presence became more real to me. My bike would be moved or I'd hear footsteps behind me in dark alleys. One foggy morning, I saw him standing far away under a streetlight. His smile directed not at me, but something behind me. A chilling sight that made me spin around in fear. Fear became my constant companion. I started taking different routes and avoiding quiet corners where Mr. Franklin might be lurking. Despite my efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Well, one really hot afternoon, seeking refuge from the heat in an abandoned warehouse, I overheard two men talking about Mr. Franklin. They spoke in hushed tones, warning each other about his collection of photos and letters about people in our neighborhood, more specifically some of the children in the neighborhood. They said he watched everyone closely and they needed to keep an eye on me. Well, I couldn't sleep at all later that night. The thought of Mr. Franklin's obsession with collecting information about us gave me the chills. Finally determined to confront him, I set out on my milk route at dawn the next morning. Pedaling down Elderberry Lane, I gathered my courage and knocked on his door.
Come on in, boy.
Mr. Franklin's voice called from inside in a tone of kindness but also menacing at the same time. Mentally preparing myself, I entered his house. The air inside smelled musty from old books, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with files neatly labeled with names of people that I knew from the neighborhood. Mr. Franklin sat at a cluttered desk beneath a dusty chandelier. His smile when he turned to face me was eerie, yet there was a hint of anticipation in his eyes. "You've been watching me," I accused, my voice trembling. Mr. Franklin's smile widened.
Watching, yes. But don't worry. I'm not just watching you, my boy. I watch them all,"
he said, gesturing to the files around us. He explained that he was an observer, a collector of stories and lives, trying to understand and capture the essence of what it meant to be alive. His words carried a strange longing, a desire to connect with lives passing him by unnoticed. At this point, I was absolutely horrified, and I wanted out of his house immediately. But curiosity got the best of me. "Why?" I managed to ask, struggling to grasp his obsession. Mr. Franklin looked at me with a mix of disappointment and resignation.
"I want to know, to understand,"
he said softly.
"To possess something of the lives that surround me."
With a newfound resolve, I declared that I wouldn't be part of his collection. Mr. Franklin nodded sadly, and with a wave of his hand, he allowed me to leave. Walking away from Elderberry Lane that morning, I felt relieved yet haunted by the weight of Mr. Franklin's gaze. Over the years, the neighborhood changed, replaced by modern streets and buildings, but the memory of Mr. Franklin and his unsettling obsession remained etched into my mind, a reminder of how darkness can hide beneath ordinary facades. Though I've moved on and built a different life for myself, there are nights when I find myself staring into the darkness, half expecting to see Mr. Franklin's figure with that unsettling smile. I've always been good at blending in, at becoming part of the background. It's a skill that served me well over the years, especially now as I watch her, the young woman in apartment 3B. From my vantage point across the courtyard behind the safety of drawn curtains and a partially open window, I observe her daily routines with a mix of fascination and longing. And if by now you couldn't already tell, this is a different kind of story, the one where I'm the creeper. Anyways, she doesn't know me. Not really. To her, I'm just another face in the building, perhaps a neighbor she passes in the hallway or nods to in the elevator. But to me, she is my everything. Her name is Sarah. I learned that from the mailbox one afternoon when I chanced to see her retrieve her mail. Sarah with the easy smile and the infectious laugh that echoes down the corridor on occasion. I know her schedule almost as well as my own. In the mornings, she emerges from her apartment at precisely 7:45, dressed for work in smart blouses and pencil skirts that accentuate her figure. She carries a sleek black briefcase and often stops by the coffee shop on the corner before then disappearing into the throng of the city's morning rush. I've imagined countless scenarios where our paths might cross naturally. Perhaps at the corner cafe where I could strike up a casual conversation about the weather or the latest news. But I know better than to risk the fragile fabric of my carefully constructed reality. No, it's safer to remain in the shadows, to watch and to wait. During the day, I occupy myself with mundane tasks, an errand here, a trip to the grocery store there, all the while keeping one ear tuned to the hum of life in the apartment complex. Occasionally, I'll catch glimpses of her through the frosted glass of her kitchen window as she prepares dinner or unwinds after a long day. Nights are the hardest, when the silence of the building presses in around me like a suffocating blanket. That's when I find myself drawn to the window, drawn to the faint glow of light from apartment 3B. Sometimes she reads, curled up on the couch with a book held close to her chest. Other times she watches television, the flickering screen casting shadows across her face. I wonder what occupies her thoughts during those quiet moments. Does she think of me, the faceless neighbor who watches her from across the courtyard? Or does she go about life, oblivious to the silent presence that hovers on the periphery of her world? I've tried to rationalize my obsession, to convince myself that it's harmless, that it's merely a passing fascination, but the truth is far more insidious. I can't tear myself away from her. The need to know her, to understand her. It consumes me in ways that I just can't explain. Tonight is no different. As I stand at the window, the darkness outside broken only by the soft glow of streetlights, my gaze inevitably drifts to apartment 3B. I see movement, a flicker of movement that draws me closer to the glass, my breath fogging the window pane. She's there, framed against the lamplight from the living room, her silhouette ethereal and distant. There's a vulnerability about her in these moments, a rawness that she only reveals when she thinks no one's watching. And yet, I'm watching. I'm always watching. Suddenly she turns, as if sensing my gaze from across the courtyard. My heart lurches in my chest, and for a fleeting instant, our eyes meet through the glass. Panic surges through me, threatening to unravel the fragile threads of my carefully constructed facade. But then she smiles, a small knowing smile that sends a shiver down my spine. Does she recognize me? Does she even understand the depths of my obsession, the lengths to which I've gone to remain hidden in plain sight? Or is it merely a trick of the light, a figment of my fevered imagination? I drew back from the window, retreating into the darkness of my own apartment. The weight of my guilt settles heavily on my shoulders. I know that what I'm doing is wrong, that my fixation on her is unhealthy and dangerous. Yet still, I find myself drawn back to the window, drawn back to the quiet sanctuary of apartment 3B. For in those stolen moments of observation, I catch fleeting glimpses of a life that I can never truly be a part of. A life that only exists beyond the confines of my own fractured reality. And so I continue to watch, to wait, to yearn for a connection that may never come. For in the end, I'm nothing more than the watcher in the shadows, forever bound to the object of my obsession by the invisible threads of desire and regret. Hey everyone, I want to share a story that really shook up me and my boyfriend. A couple of years ago, I moved to the UK for university. It was a big move for me, but I needed to get away from my parents' toxic situation back home. My first year at uni was spent in student accommodation where I met some really awesome people and enjoyed my newfound independence. I didn't meet my boyfriend until later, but life felt good. By my second year, I decided to move into a house with some friends that we rented through the university. It was nice to have our own space and not worry about noise restrictions like we did in our small shared flat the year before. My room was on the ground floor with a window that looked out into a small yard. I'd often go out there to smoke. There was an old thin wooden door that led to the street where we kept our bins and stuff. The door could only be locked from inside the backyard, so we tied it shut with some strings to keep it closed properly. We had neighbors on both sides. On one side were 5 guys who seemed much older than university students. They were a bit strange. One day there was a police incident involving them. One guy had attacked his flatmates with a kitchen knife and set their kitchen on fire. It was really scary to see one of them covered in cuts and blood. My flatmates and I helped clean him up and gave him a shirt to wear. The police took the guy away who caused all the trouble, but the guy we helped out was odd. He talked nonsense and made unwanted advances towards me. We noticed that he smoked a lot of marijuana, but we tried to be helpful and didn't think much about it at the time. After that incident, I'd see him around sometimes whenever I was coming home from uni or running errands. He once approached me on the street near a corner shop and tried to start a strange conversation. I felt really uncomfortable and ignored him. He said something creepy like,
I'll wait for you in front of your house so we can talk.
I brushed it off as a joke, bought my drink, and headed back home. But as I turned into my street, there he was with his flatmate sitting on my doorstep. I panicked and called my male flatmate to ask him to tell them to leave, but he wasn't home. I waited nervously until they finally left an hour later. I rushed back home, locked the door, and felt relieved. Despite this, things got worse. One day while smoking in the backyard, I noticed the wood door was open. The strings we used to keep it closed were cut. I closed the door again and put on a new string, assuming it was just a mistake by one of the flatmates. Those weird neighbors often fought loudly, which disturbed my flatmates and me at night. We got used to it after a while though. One evening, my boyfriend stayed over as usual. He woke up suddenly in the middle of the night because of a loud noise and whispering. He woke me up quietly, and we listened in the dark. Suddenly, the wooden door banged open, and we heard footsteps near my window. We froze as we heard the backyard door being shaken, like someone was trying to break in. Thankfully, our curtains were closed, so they couldn't see us. We were ready to dress quickly and escape through the window if they came in. Then we heard my window open some more, and one of the guys spoke in a language that we didn't understand. They were trying to get in. My boyfriend and I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, got dressed, and then ran out of the room and out of the house. I called my flatmates and then the police. Luckily, the police station was nearby, and they arrived in less than 5 minutes. I was in shock, and I don't remember much after the police came. They caught one of the guys, but the other escaped. Later on, they found him a few streets away smoking weed. The police searched their house and they found drugs and a huge kitchen knife. It really terrified me to think they were trying to break in with such dangerous intentions. I never did anything to provoke them, so I couldn't understand why they targeted me and my boyfriend. One of them was sentenced to 2 years in prison for carrying a weapon with intent to harm. I moved back home a few months later because I was so scared and I couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if my boyfriend hadn't woken up. I'm still coping with the trauma to this day. I often wake up from the slightest noise and have nightmares, but I'm really grateful to have my boyfriend by my side. We talk about it often, which helps me feel better.
I used to work the night shift at the front desk of an apartment building. The lobby area had a desk, and I was in charge of buzzing people in through the door. I was essentially a layer of security. I would ensure that whoever was coming into the building lived there or was a friend of somebody and had received approval to enter. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., so there wasn't usually much action going on during my shift, especially after midnight. One night, I was in the middle of my shift, trying not to fall asleep. Suddenly, I saw movement on one of the cameras from the garage. The garage was attached to the building, but to get inside, you still needed to come up to the main doors and be buzzed in by me. Someone was walking through the garage towards the stairs that would take them towards the lobby area. I hadn't seen anybody drive into the garage and park their car, but I was pretty tired and could have missed it easily. I watched as the person entered the stairs and made their way up towards the door to get into the lobby. They immediately tugged to open the door, apparently not knowing that they had to be buzzed in by me. It was a younger man. He was maybe right around his 30s. He looked in at me through the glass, motioning for me to open the door. It was clear that he did not live here, so I walked over towards the entry doors, motioning for him to leave. The man started explaining that he was here to see his friend and needed to get in. I had received no warning about this man, and there was no note that would indicate that he was supposed to be granted access to the building. The man glared angrily at me when I once again said that I wasn't going to be letting him in. He began pounding on the door, and while his arms were raised, I saw that he had a gun tucked into his waistband as well. The man was quite strong, and I was genuinely worried that the glass might break. I scurried back to my desk, alerting the authorities, and letting them know that a man with a gun was attempting to enter the apartment building. After a few moments, the man stopped pounding on the glass, and once again glared at me. He shouted that he would be back, and disappeared down the stairway back towards the garage. I watched on the cameras as he exited the garage and disappeared outside into the night. I ended up only working that night shift a couple more weeks, not seeing the man again. I have no idea if he ever showed up overnight again since I had stopped working there, but I wish the next night shift worker good luck if they ever did or do see him again. I spend the nights working as a security officer. My job is to travel around to various buildings, mostly businesses that hire my company for security. I swing by each of these places multiple times at night, ensuring that nothing funny is going on and the building is secure. Honestly, my job is really boring. As you can picture that on a night-to-night basis, not much is going on around an office building. I'm required to walk around each entry point to the building, making sure that it's locked and secure. I have keys to all these buildings in case I need to go inside, but in the 3 months working this night shift, I never had to go inside a building. However, that all changed during a shift I had 2 weeks ago. I had reached my third building of the night, which was a smaller 4-story office building. I made my rounds around the perimeter of the building, shining my light up at windows ensuring they were intact, and pulling on doors making sure they were locked. I circled around to the back side of the building. When I did, I was shocked to see that a door was not only unlocked, but also propped open. I never had to deal with a situation like this before, and quite frankly, I was nervous to go inside the building. I maneuvered my way through the building, moving very slowly and shining my flashlight into every room and corner. It took me a while, especially since I was nervous, but I made my way through all 4 floors of the building without seeing anything unusual. I made my way back to the door that had been left open, removing the prop in the door and locking it behind me. I continued my rounds, making my way through the rest of the buildings that needed to be checked for the night. I decided to head back over to the office building that I had walked through earlier to make sure that everything was okay. I pulled my truck into the parking lot and began walking around the building doing rounds once more. To my surprise, the same back exit was once again unlocked and propped open. At this point, I was very confused. There wasn't supposed to be anyone still in the building this late, and there were no lights inside that I could see. I reluctantly entered the office building once again and searched it from top to bottom, this time even calling out multiple times to see if anyone was there. Once again, I saw and heard nothing unusual my entire trip throughout the building. I returned to the back exit and saw that the door was now closed. I hadn't unpropped the door when I first entered the building, but now the door was closed, and the brick that had been used to prop it open was nowhere in sight. Again, this was my first time having to enter a building while I had this job, so I was a little scared at this point. I quickly locked the door and hurried back to the safety of my truck. Nobody was supposed to be in that building, so I was relieved that I hadn't ended up seeing anybody during my rounds of the building. It was eerie to me though that during both of my searches of the building, somebody had been in there somewhere evading me and then slipped out the back door without me seeing them. I called the office building the next day, asking if anything important was missing or had been stolen, but nothing they were aware of was gone. I still currently work the security night shift job, but haven't had any nights like that one at the office building since then, thankfully. I'm retired now, but for a couple of years in my 50s, I worked a night shift in a mall. I was a custodian and would come in and clean once the mall had closed for the night. Most of my nights were spent cleaning up the food court areas, as well as taking care of bathrooms. One night, I was sweeping the floor in the food court area, and I heard a fit of coughing coming from somewhere. I looked around the dimly lit food court area, but didn't see anyone. A couple of times throughout my years working there, I would discover somebody or a group of people who had hidden in the mall and were doing a challenge of staying there overnight. I didn't see anyone, and I heard no further noises, so I just continued cleaning. If someone was trying to stay in the mall overnight, I'd see them eventually, unless they stayed put in one spot the entire time. About 15 minutes had passed, and I was wiping off tables now. Suddenly, a series of loud bangs startled me. I looked up and saw that a whole table and all the surrounding chairs had been knocked over onto the ground. I walked over to the items on the ground, which had happened near the edge of the food court. There was no one to be seen anywhere. I ventured down away from the food court a bit to see if I could see anyone running away or hiding. I was about to turn around back to the food court when I heard water running inside the women's bathroom. All the bathrooms at the mall had sinks that were motion sensors. Someone had to be inside of the bathroom, and I had a feeling that it was going to be the culprit I was looking for from the food court. The sink was still running as I slowly and as quietly as I could entered the bathroom. As I turned the corner into the bathroom, the water abruptly stopped running. There was nobody anywhere to be seen. I checked every stall and still nothing. I chalked it up to a faulty sensor on the sink and decided that I'd put in a work order for maintenance to fix it. Oddly enough, as I walked away from the bathroom, I heard the sink turn on again. I walked back to the food court, very confused and also a little spooked. I went about the rest of my night as usual, finishing my cleaning duties. A couple days later, I received an email from maintenance that there had been nothing wrong with the sink sensor and that it was functioning normally. From then on, at least once a week, I would hear the water running from the sink in that bathroom. For the rest of the time that I worked at the mall, I just accepted that I wasn't alone in that mall, and I stayed away from that bathroom. I never had any more incidents though with the mysterious knocking over tables and chairs in the food court. Thankfully, that spirit, or whatever it was, stayed in the women's bathroom.
This story is told in the perspective of a female. This happened to me a few days ago on my way home after a long and busy day at work. I work right smack in the middle of downtown Salt Lake City, and I lived in the suburbs, so it was a long drive back home. My boss, being the asshole he was, gave me a week of closing shifts during the week I was supposed to be out of town for vacation. However, he said that the company needed extra help and told me I couldn't go. Needless to say, I was pissed, but hey, you can't always win, right? It was around 7, maybe 8 o'clock at night, and I had about an hour to get home. I ended up taking a different route home, as this route would only take me about 45 minutes than the hour drive. Seeing the fact that I was dead tired and just wanting to go home, I decided to take the route. According to my GPS, I was about halfway home, listening to my music, when I hear my car start making this rattling noise. I cussed myself as this noise continues, causing my car to come to a complete stop. Thankfully though, the road was empty, as no one ever used it at this time of night, but that obviously didn't solve the car problem. For context, I drive a 2003 Honda Civic, aka box, which always had problems with it. I'm only 19 and my job doesn't pay enough for me to afford a new car. I work 20 hours a week, making $15 an hour, so it was the only thing I could afford. I pop the hood and take a look at the car to see that my car battery was full of corrosion. Out of anger, I hit my car knowing that I'd have to call a tow truck, which could be a mission seeing how far I was from the city. That being said, I called AAA, but they said it could take a while to send someone out due to the distance. Alright, whatever. I guess I didn't have a choice, right? Needless to say, I bite my lip, just waiting inside my car for the tow truck to come. After a while, I started to notice how alone I was on this road. It was dead silent, and all I could hear were the crickets from the woods. As I'm playing a game on my phone, I look in my rearview mirror and see a pair of headlights approaching me from the back. The closer it came, the more I made it out to be a truck. I thought that it could have been the tow truck, but as it pulled up behind my car, I saw that it was definitely not a tow truck. It was just a standard white pickup truck, and that's when I saw a man that appeared to be Hispanic step out and tap on my window. I'd say he was maybe in his mid-50s, asking me if I needed a lift. Trying to be safe, I lower my window just a tad and tell him that my car broke down, but that the tow truck was on its way. I thank him for the offer, but told him I had everything under control and that I didn't want to be a bother. For some reason though, this guy didn't seem to get the hint and began to ask me if I could open the door for him and that he could help me. This started to concern me now. He wasn't going away and was now trying to get in my car. Keep in mind, there's nobody else on this road, and I'm basically in the middle of nowhere with this person who seemed as if they were up to no good. He stares at me through the window for a good minute or so before walking back to his truck. I thought that was the end of it and that he would finally drive off, but boy was I wrong. After spending about 5 minutes in his truck, he comes back out and motions for me to roll down my window. I comply and roll down my window a bit and ask him what he wanted. This time in a more annoyed tone, as I didn't want anything to do with him. Somehow, he notices my change of behavior and says that he's just trying to help and that there's no reason to get angry with him. I tell him that I didn't need help and that the tow truck would take care of me. He then goes on to explain that he had a pair of jumper cables in his truck and could easily get my car started. At this point, I see yet another pair of headlights coming from behind me and instantly recognized it as the tow truck. Yeah, look man, help is already here. Thank you for the offer, but I'd rather have the tow truck help me. By this point, the tow truck driver gets out and the man then looks both ways, turns to me, and walks back to his truck driving away. The tow truck driver then comes to my window and I open my door explaining the issue with my car's battery. As I'm telling him what's going on, he stops me mid-sentence and asks if I knew who that man was. I told him no and that he just pulled up behind me and tried to help. The tow truck driver just stared at me with this pale face and said that he's actually seen that man before. Turns out, he was a registered sex offender from 2 towns over and would sometimes be on this road at night looking to lure any unsuspecting women. This ranged anywhere from getting him to go with him somewhere to attempting to get in their cars, which is exactly what he tried doing. He was released from prison 3 years ago for good behavior and hasn't been seen since. The tow truck driver was almost certain it was him, as he was able to get a good look at him from the headlights of the tow truck. He tows my car away, with him giving me a ride to the police station, making sure I was safe. I couldn't give an accurate description to the police, other than that his truck was white. The police said they do some investigative work, but never got back to me about any leads. It's been almost a week now, and I'm still paranoid knowing that he's probably still out there. Had I been that dumb or naive to open my door or window for him, God, I don't even know what he might have done. One thing I will take from this is that I'll never drive down that road at night again, and I always carry pepper spray with me. This story is a bit short, but this is seriously one of the creepiest moments of my life. I'm a 26-year-old female and I was driving home from a friend's birthday party one night. I live in a very rural area of Tennessee, so there's a lot of hills, forests, and flatlands throughout most of the state. Anyway, on this particular night, I was driving through I-81 between Knoxville and Bristol. It was around 2 a.m. on a weeknight, so there were no other cars on this road other than mine. Now, whenever I'm out late at night, I always remember to have my nighttime coffee. This night, however, I didn't have my coffee, which caused me to become exhausted while behind the wheel. So there I am, driving for about 25 minutes when, out of nowhere, something jumps out onto the road from the trees. This scared me to the bone, causing me to let out an oh shit and brake hard. It looked like a person, to be honest, who just straight up jumped in front of my car as if they were trying to get hit. I only caught a glimpse of them and tried to see if I had ran someone over. I was ready to give this person a piece of my mind and got out of my car to see not a soul in sight. I was seemingly the only person on this road, and right then I started freaking out, wondering what the hell just happened. After taking a few minutes to compose myself, I get back in my car only for it to not start. I tried starting the engine several times, but nothing I did ever made it work. Long story short, I called a tow truck to give me a ride, and it took about a month to get my car back up and running. Till this day, I'm strongly convinced that whatever I had seen was completely paranormal and was the reason for my car dying. So, I'm a 25-year-old male, and this happened just last year in the summer. I was on a road trip from Albuquerque, New Mexico to Los Angeles, California. The reason for this trip was to visit my old friend from my childhood who I hadn't seen in years. Moving away from one of your best friends is enough to make anyone feel lonely and sad. His name was Jason, and we had been good friends ever since I could remember. I had only saw him once a year when I had time off from work, so this trip was very important to me. If I remember correctly, I was driving down a long stretch of road somewhere in Arizona when my car suddenly dies out of nowhere. Being rightfully pissed off, I hit my dashboard while trying to get the damn thing to start. Eventually, I get out of my car and open the hood. My car's battery had been covered in battery acid and had spread throughout the other components. I was stuck on an empty road in the middle of nowhere with nothing but desert and cliffs. I take out my phone to try and get a hold of Jason to see if he could come get me. When we were younger teens, we'd always have this little slogan when trying to reach each other. It went something along the lines of, "So-and-so, do you copy?" And I repeat the catchphrase, attempting to reach him. "Hey Jason, do you copy? I'm in a bit of a pickle here." However, signal around here was basically non-existent, so I had no other choice but to walk to the nearest town. All the while, I'm still trying to reach Jason, but there was no luck. About 15 minutes into my walk, I look behind me and notice two headlights in the distance getting closer and closer. It only took me a second to realize that it was a car, and I flagged them down while practically begging for help. Believe it or not, it seemed as if my prayers had come true, as the car then starts to slow down and pulls up next to me. Inside was an older-looking gentleman, and in the back were two younger men with a middle-aged woman wearing sunglasses in the middle. The two men seemed to be carrying her as she appeared to be asleep. The driver asked as to how they could be a help, and I explained my situation to them. One of the men in the back seat had said something about how that sounded like a you problem and that they'd be no help. I apologized, thanking them for their time, and told them I'd be on my way. However, that's when I noticed the woman in the car. She looked slumped over and just appeared to be out of it. I then asked in a direct tone to the driver, "Everything alright with her?" He then looks at the men, looks at me, and says, No, she's dead, but why is that your concern?" One of the men in the back take off her sunglasses, revealing her face. The second I saw her face, I can now see as to why she was deceased. Her lifeless body limped over the two men with her mouth hung open as if it had been broken. The driver then looks at me and says 6 words that have haunted me ever since. Calling the cops would be a mistake. I then back off and start running back to my car as the other car sped off until they were too far to be seen. Thankfully, my car willingly started back up again, where I was able to go to the next town and get a new battery. I obviously did inform the police about my encounter and gave them an exact description of the men. Up until now, however, there have been unfortunately no leads as to who might have been responsible. In the end, I did get to see my friend, and nothing happened again while on that trip. There are truly some sick and twisted people in this world that we just have to live with. It's unfortunately a harsh reality of life.
Hey everyone, my name is Dennis Blaze. I was around 17 when this happened. And to give you an idea of how long ago this took place, I am now 43 years old. I grew up in a small town across from Seattle during the late 90s. At the time, there was maybe a total population of 6,000 to 7,000 people. The town didn't really have a whole lot of things to do. One night I was hanging out with my 3 friends, who we'll call Gary, Mark, and Rob. We all got bored of just sitting at home, so we decided to go for a drive. We stopped to eat at a McDonald's before continuing our aimless endeavor. We had been driving for about 15 minutes after we left the restaurant. It must have been about 10 p.m. at this point. My vehicle was a '92 Ford Probe. Mark rolled down his window. I didn't think anything of it at first. I just figured he needed some air. We were descending a large hill when I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. The lights got closer, and I saw that it was a semi-truck, but it wasn't hauling a trailer behind it. As the semi-truck was approaching, I could see Mark sitting forward. I wasn't sure what he was doing. I then saw him throw something at the truck as it passed. "What the hell are you doing?" "Relax, it was just a sweet and sour packet from the Nuggets." I was annoyed, but I didn't think anything would happen. We got to the bottom of the hill. When I looked into the rearview mirror, I could now see the headlights from the semi-truck barreling down the hill, rushing directly at my car. Holy shit. Everyone in the car turned around at once. I think he just pissed him off, Mark." I quickly found a driveway to turn around, then raced back up the hill as fast as I could to gain some distance from the semi-truck. When I got to the top of the hill, I turned off all my lights, and everyone in the car told me to turn down this side road that was pitch dark. I could barely see a thing, but I decided to go for it. I then turned the car back around before putting it in park. We thought it would be a good idea to wait for a few minutes before heading back to my house. We waited for about 2 minutes when we saw those damn headlights coming in our direction. I couldn't believe it. The truck driver must have seen us turn down this road. I thought for sure we had lost him. The massive truck seemingly blocked our only way out. It came to a full stop. We then heard the driver's side door opening. Soon the driver was illuminated by his own headlights. This man looked huge. "What the hell should we do, Mark? You're the one who got us into this. What do you think we should do? Let's get the out of here." "I don't think I have enough room to get around him." "No, that's not true. On the left, there's a clearing. He's not hauling a trailer, so if you floor it now, you should have just enough room to get around him." I decided to trust Mark and stepped on the gas pedal. I narrowly missed hitting the man. I remember him angrily shouting at us as we zoomed past. Who knows what he would have done if he got his hands on any one of us. Mark turned out to be correct. I had just enough room to make it out of there, and I floored it all the way back home. My parents were at the casino that night, and they weren't going to be home for at least a few more hours. We locked all the doors and closed the curtains, checking every couple of minutes for any headlights. When we were convinced that we were no longer in danger, we all had a good laugh about the whole situation. It was crazy. I told Mark he's no longer allowed to eat chicken nuggets again. I'm glad we all made it out of there safely. But I'll never forget the fear I felt when I was staring down those headlights on that dark road.
About 5 years ago, I was driving back home from work late one night. I worked at a restaurant/bar at the time and often worked very late. So it was past midnight when I was finally going home and driving my Honda Accord. I lived with my parents during this time in a neighborhood about 10 minutes from my job. So after leaving work, I got onto the roads, which were very quiet, as they often were in the late night hours. It was a huge difference from when I would go to work and there would be lots of cars on the road, to when I would drive home and there would be basically nobody. So within probably 2 or 3 minutes of driving home, I did notice a car behind me. When it started following me though, I had no idea. I kept driving home and was realizing that the car behind me was turning wherever I did. Soon, I was very suspicious that I was being followed. I was never quite 100% sure though. I thought maybe it was a neighbor or something. There are many other houses in the neighborhood. Still, I was suspicious by it. Soon, I had made it to the street where my parents' house was. I turned onto it, and the car behind me did the same. I actually thought about driving around the block or turning around, but ultimately, I drove to my house and pulled into the driveway. I remember being really nervous as I was pulling in that the car would as well, but it didn't. Instead, the car kept going down the street. I felt much better, and then got out of my car and walked inside. By now, my parents and sister had long gone to bed upstairs. The lights were off inside the house, and it was very quiet. I went into the kitchen to make some ramen noodles or something like that. I was very hungry and wanted something quick to have before bed. As I was waiting for the water to heat up though, I casually walked around a little. I went into the living room and glanced out the front window. That's when I noticed a car driving extremely slow down the street, and I further noticed that it was the same car that had seemingly followed me all the way home. Now I was very suspicious. I continued to watch out the window. The car then turned and parked on the side of the street just past our house. I heard the engine turn off and then watched the driver's door open and saw a man get out. He then started walking towards our front yard. That's when I jumped back from the window so that he wouldn't see me. I went back into the kitchen and just hoped that this guy wasn't going to try to break in or something. Seconds later though, there was a knock at the front door. My heart started racing. What could this guy possibly want? Several moments went by and he knocked again. I slowly walked into the living room and went to a window. When I looked outside, I saw the man walking away from the front door, but he wasn't going back to his car. Instead, he walked around the side of our house. I went back into the kitchen and looked out of a back window. I was very careful when I was looking so that I wouldn't be seen. The man appeared to walk through the backyard. He made his way through the backyard and then went out of sight again. I then went back to the front of the house. When I looked out of the window, I didn't see the guy for a while. Soon though, I saw him going through the front yard. He went back to his car, then got inside. Then he drove away. After that, I went back to what I was doing. I looked out of the window a few more times that night, but he didn't come back. I still wonder who he was, why he followed me home, and what he was doing.
Back when I was 18 years old, for about 6 months, my boss drove me to work. I know that may sound a little weird, but I didn't get a license yet, and he knew my mom. It also helped that he lived about 2 minutes from my house. It was just a weird situation, and no matter how I try to preface it, I just know that it sounds weird. Most mornings, the drive to work was uneventful. We'd usually get to work at around 6:30 a.m., and neither one of us would talk in the car. He was usually hungover, and I just wasn't the talkative type. I'm a quiet person by nature, but I was even quieter back then. One day, we had to go to work at 3 in the morning for inventory. My boss decided it would be good to show me, so I got up extra early for that 3 a.m. shift. On the way into work that morning, my boss said that he wanted to grab some coffee at the gas station since it was the only place that was open. When we parked, as he was getting out of the car, he told me that he was going to hit the restroom as well. I just nodded and decided to wait in the car. I was exhausted from staying up way too late playing video games, and I was planning on just resting my eyes until we got to work. I'm assuming a few minutes had passed. I don't know exactly how long it was because I was falling asleep while I was waiting for my boss. With no notice, the back seat door opened, and it startled me in my half-asleep state. I just thought it was my boss, and then I felt movement behind me. I finally looked behind me, and just sitting there in the back seat was a woman. She didn't appear to be homeless or look like she was on anything. She just looked strange. And we made eye contact for a few seconds, and then I whipped back around trying to process what was happening. I'm a really quiet person, and I was even more quiet back then, like I said, and I didn't know what to say or what to do. I was just hoping my boss was going to come back out soon. I started to finally work up the courage to ask what was going on, and I was immediately freaked out when I turned around. She was sitting there, now smiling, but looking forward. I don't really know how to describe her eyes. They were cold and dark and seemed almost lifeless, even though she was kind of pretty. Even as I write this, I still can't get the image of her out of my mind. It had probably been about 30 seconds since all this started, and I finally uttered my words when I asked her, "Hey, is everything okay? You know this isn't your car, right?" Instead of answering with words, she just started to scream, erratically. It was so erratic that it was shaking the entire car, it felt like, or maybe just my head. I jumped back just out of panic, confusion, and shock, and I saw my boss walking out of the gas station. I just dove out of the passenger side door and shut it behind me. My boss was confused and asked me what the heck was going on, and I just pointed to the woman in the back seat of his car. We both just stood there, almost in amazement and disbelief. She was still screaming, shaking and rocking back and forth. We could physically see the car shaking from her wild movements from inside the car. My boss approached the back seat where she was sitting, and as he grabbed the door handle, she put both her hands on the window, and I kid you not, started to hiss and growl at my boss. He said, "Nope," and walked back towards me. I was standing probably 10 feet away at this point. He immediately called the police, and we were hoping that they would arrive soon since it was a small town. The entire time that we were waiting for the cops, we could hear the woman screaming and the car still shaking. After a minute or two of waiting for the police, we went inside and watched her from inside the gas station. There was just something unsettling about the entire situation. She wasn't trying to rob us. She only looked like she wanted to cause harm when we got near the car. I mean, she was sitting in the back seat, so she wasn't even trying to steal the car. It was just all so weird. The cops showed up maybe 5 minutes after the call. We went outside to greet the officer and fill him in on the situation, and he looked confused, and I'm not gonna lie, he almost looked kind of amused by the whole situation. The officer tried to get the woman to come out calmly, but after a minute of her screaming and growling, he basically went into the car and apprehended her. And this is where this bad dream truly turned into a nightmare. Upon arrest, the officer had to remove 4 knives from her person. Yeah, you heard that right. This woman had 4 sharp objects on her. Thankfully, she never showed us the knives or even hinted at the fact that she had them. But even more disturbing perhaps is the fact that she didn't have an ID on her and she wasn't talking, so the officer had no idea who she was. This complete stranger came out of nowhere. She got into my boss's car without saying a word. She went from smiling to off the wall insane. Then, to cap things off, she had no ID and 4 deadly weapons on her. I've had some wild things happen to me over the years, but I'd have to say that this was probably the strangest and most terrifying that's ever happened to me. It's been years, and I remember this moment like it was yesterday. I'll never forget that woman's face, and I honestly wonder what she's up to now.
It was 2019. I lived in a house with 2 other girls. We were all in our early 20s. The house backed into a park. It was more like an open lot that was accessible through a main road. There wasn't any playground or barbecue area there, just long thick grass and trees. The backyard fence was only about waist high, and there was a tree on the right-hand side, obstructing about half of the view over the fence into the park. One night after I showered and got into my underwear and a baggy shirt, because it was summer, I hear the dog in the backyard going absolutely mad. My housemate was not home at the time, and the dog belonged to her. I fly out of the back door and see that he's baring his teeth and snarling toward the fence. He had caught and killed possums before, so I was concerned that there was one by the tree. I grabbed him by the collar to get him back inside and away from the possum. As I did, I got a shiver and a sense that something wasn't right. He was still going ballistic, and I looked up and saw a figure standing in the dark just on the other side of the fence. It was a man who was about 5'10", and he didn't say anything. I couldn't see his face. I naturally jump and say, "Oh my goodness, I didn't even see you there." The man did not reply. He just stood there in his beanie and jacket, staring at me. I kept the dog in front of me as I backed into the house. Once inside, I locked up everything and closed all the windows, and I called my partner to come over. A few small things happened over the next few months, but nothing that really stood out. There was a popped security screen, and we found some computer parts in the lawn that could have been discarded by kids or something. One night, I get home after having drinks and dinner with some friends. It was late, around 10 p.m. We often left the back door open to let the dog come in and out. We always just kind of assumed that the dog would scare away anyone from breaking in. How naive. When I got into the kitchen, which was next to the back door, I hear the dog barking in the backyard. Again, this has happened many times before, so I ignore it and make myself a drink before going out there and bringing him back inside. I then see a shadow move to my right, inside the f***ing house, rounding the corner from the back door into the kitchen. I froze. I then think to myself, what on earth is this man doing? It's summer, and he's in a long coat covering his entire neck to his wrists. And then panic set in. I back myself up to the counter and looked down to see that there was a knife in his hand. It was one of our kitchen knives from the block behind me. So now I'm aware he has already been inside this house. This wasn't a robbery. He had already had the chance to steal anything he wanted. There was a scuffle, and he pulled the rug from under my feet, and I hit my head on the counter. I was knocked unconscious. The last thing I remember is the dog barking from behind him. It turns out our scary dog was too afraid to attack him, but he was still doing his best to scare him away. The police and detectives eventually came, but there wasn't anything that they could do, because technically there was no breaking and entering, since our back door was left wide open. This also meant that it would be difficult to determine what he touched. I also seem to remember that he was wearing gloves, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I did have defensive wounds to my hands, and some bruising, but overall I was fine. It could have been a lot worse. Nothing ever came of this. The police suggested that we lock our back door from now on, and hope nothing like this would ever happen again. I can't be sure if it was the man I saw by our back fence. Around this time we had a third housemate. One day she asked me for a cigarette because she was stressed out about something. I told her that I didn't smoke, and then she suggested that it must be our other housemate. Confused, I said, "What are you talking about? Neither of us smoke." Apparently, she had been picking up cigarette butts from outside the front and side doors of our house for her entire stay. She never said anything about it because she decided it was something that bothered her, but clearly not us, so she didn't mind cleaning them up. She would leave very early in the morning for work, before either of us woke up, which is why we never saw them. This is going to be kind of long, so please bear with me. So this happened when I was in high school, and still living with my parents and my younger brother in a house in the suburbs. The area I grew up in was very quiet and safe. We lived in the Midwest, and our town was as Midwest as you can get, which means that everyone knew each other. Even the strangers were very kind and eager to help, with some exceptions, of course. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where every third house had the same exact layout, which means everyone was pretty much living on an equal level. For the most part, everyone got along pretty well, and there was hardly any crime since everyone was coming from a similar financial background. So it would be an understatement to say that it felt very safe where I lived. That was until strange things began to happen. At first, it was small things, pretty inconsequential in the moment. But now when I look back at everything, I always made a connection to the strange events that were going on. It started at the beginning of my junior year of high school. One morning I woke up early to put away my clothes. Because I'm weird about these kind of things, I make sure all my dressers and doors were closed before I left, as I was the last one out of the house, and I happened to have a doctor's appointment on that day. I was the first one back. When I came up to my room, my door wasn't closed all the way, and my closet was completely open. I thought it was weird, but I brushed it off. But this happened more than once. I would sometimes be missing shirts or pants after I told myself that I was just being stupid and probably misplaced them somewhere. Another night, after I had gone to bed, I was woken up by the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. The fifth step always creaked very loudly, and when I heard that, I instantly sat up. I remember it clearly because I could hear it over my fan. After the footsteps stopped, I checked every room upstairs. All of the bedrooms were on the second floor. All the doors were closed and everyone else was sleeping. All of the doors creak pretty loudly when they're opened in the night, so I would have heard something since I was the only one who slept with their door open. I couldn't see much. Everyone was sound asleep. I stayed awake for a while to try to catch it again, but I eventually fell asleep, figuring that my mind was just playing tricks on me. I asked my family about it casually the next morning, but everyone said they slept through the night. All of these small occurrences accumulated into one of the weirdest experiences I've had to date. It was halfway through the year, and I had driven myself and my brother home from high school. I threw down my bags on the dining room table and laid down on the couch to watch some TV. My brother went downstairs to take the dog out and then play some video games. I could tell by the fact that there were no other cars in the garage that my parents were still at work. So I put the volume on medium so I could hear them when they got back. My parents used to give me a lot of crap for watching TV after school. Everything was fine, and I actually began dozing off when I heard a very distinct thumping sound coming from upstairs. I thought it was just my imagination. I watch a lot of horror films, so I tend to be pretty jumpy sometimes. I went back to my show, but the thumping continued for about 5 minutes. That's when I finally decided that something was off. I muted the TV and listened for a few more minutes. It was a rhythmic thumping, and it was coming from directly upstairs. For a second, I thought it was just my dog, since he sometimes paced up and down the stairs, trying to find somewhere to lay down. So I called out for him, but my brother shouted that he was downstairs with him. So I walked up the stairs to the top and listened. The noise was coming from directly above me. I started to get scared when I realized that the only thing above me was the attic. And furthermore, I realized that it wasn't thumping that I was hearing. It was footsteps, like somebody was wearing boots and pacing around the attic. Even though I was thinking the worst, I told myself to be practical. There are only 2 entrances to the attic: a small panel in the ceiling of my brother's bedroom, and a 3rd-story window. I checked his bedroom, and the panel looked like it hadn't been touched in a very long time. We hadn't even opened it since we moved in, because the previous owners told us it was just insulation and wiring. I then thought about how we were having trouble recently with our satellite dish, and my dad had to call a repairman to come fix it. I opened the front door and went around back, but there wasn't anything on the roof. Not that I could see anyway. It was pretty high up. I then went back inside. My brother was standing in the doorway, asking me what was going on, since he heard the door open. I told him about what I heard and asked him to come check it out with me, just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. When we got upstairs, he gets this weird look on his face and then asked, "What is that?" I felt relieved knowing it wasn't just me. I whispered, "It sounds like somebody is walking up there, right?" He nods and points downstairs, suggesting that we say no more and I should follow him down there. The floors are pretty thin in this house, so in case there was somebody up there, we would want to talk about this out of earshot. Once we were downstairs, I tell him about the roof and the possibility of a repairman being up there, although I didn't see a van outside, and my brother shakes his head, saying that the repair people were coming later that week. That's when we decided to call our dad. I explain everything to him. I could tell that he didn't believe us, but was trying to be nice about it. I can't exactly blame him. It was highly improbable for somebody to even want to be in our attic, let alone get up there. He suggested it might have been a bird or a raccoon. We lived near a large patch of woods. I tried explaining to him that no animal could make that kind of thumping sound. If it was a bird, it would have had to have been repeatedly slamming itself into the floor. And even then, that wouldn't explain how the floor was creaking like somebody was shifting their weight. He said just to wait it out and that he would be home soon. The thumping continued for well over 30 minutes. I decided to camp out in my brother's room until it stopped. After about 15 minutes, I had to use the restroom. There's one right next to his room and is still under the attic. As I was washing my hands, I realized that the thumping was a lot louder now and directly above me. It was weird because before, the thumping was loud when I was in my brother's room. It was like the sound had followed me. Sometimes when I get really scared, I get super angry, so I banged twice on the ceiling. I'm a pretty tall girl, so I used my fist. I then shouted, "What the f*** is this?" The steps then completely stopped. I was confused for a second. Then clear as day, there were two loud thuds. Like someone stomping their foot twice very loud. I ran out of the bathroom to my brother, who was coming up the stairs. "What just happened?" The pacing started again, so I quickly explained everything to my brother. He then pulled out his phone and called my dad a second time. As he's trying to explain everything, I can tell that my dad is still not giving in, frustrated and frightened. I take the phone from my brother, put my dad on speaker, and hold the phone up to the attic, then say, "Listen to this." Suddenly, all the noises completely stop. Absolutely no sound whatsoever. After about a minute of silence, I hear my dad say, "What sound?" My brother and I just look at each other and bolt down the stairs. I tell my dad to come home quick and that we would wait downstairs for him. He then said that he was pulling up the driveway, so he opened the door and ran out to him. After my brother and I explained things quickly and nearly out of breath, to my dad's credit, we did sound a bit insane. He follows us upstairs to where the sound was coming from, but now there was absolutely no sound at all. And even though we beg him several times to go take a look, he laughs and says that we're just overreacting, and there was nothing there. Taking out the panel might cause some damage to the ceiling. We don't know that for sure because we've never tried to look up there, so he was pretty set on not going up there to check things out, unless he hears it himself. Of course, the steps never came back, at least not when we were around or awake. My brother secretly stayed in my room for a couple of days, because he was still freaked out about the whole thing, and we were never able to prove what happened to our parents. When the repair people finally did come, I noticed that instead of using a ladder, they went around to our backyard and climbed up to the roof from our deck. They were also able to walk around pretty freely up there, and could easily access the window to our attic, which was around the front of the house. I've always wondered if there was someone secretly living up there and would come down at night without us knowing. But if that was the case, why would they let us know that they were up there that day? It still bothers me that we never checked. My name is Caleb Fletcher. I'm 16 years old, and the story that I'm about to tell is something that I'll never forget. This took place on the 24th of August. School had been going on for about 2 weeks. So to decompress, I decided to see if my friends Griffin and Broly wanted to hop on Fortnite. My mom and sister were out shopping, and my dad was working, so I was pretty bored. It was around 8 p.m. when we finally got online to play. After a few rounds, I could tell that my friends were getting tired of losing, so they logged off after about an hour. I planned on just lying down with my phone before going to bed. That was until I heard my 2 dogs barking outside. It's not that unusual for them to bark, given how people walk on the side of the road outside of our front yard. But I still looked anyway. You can never be too careful these days. I didn't see anyone there, but seconds after I looked out of the window, I heard our garage door opening and then closing. That usually meant my dad was home from work. However, I thought it was odd that I didn't see his van outside, and he had even texted me earlier, letting me know that he would be working late. I decided to walk downstairs into the dining room to get a better look. From there, I could see that the driveway was empty. At first I thought, oh shit, could it be a ghost? For context, someone had died on our property many years ago when there used to be a gas station here. Apparently an old man put too much air into his tire and it exploded. Now, I'm not the type to go investigate strange noises in the night, so I ran back up to my bedroom and texted my family group chat to ask if anybody was home. I told my mom about the garage door, and she told me to turn off all the lights, lock my bedroom door, and stay in there until she got home. So I did just that. About 15 minutes later, I thought I heard the wooden floorboards downstairs creaking, like somebody was trying to sneak around. I didn't have anything to use as a weapon, so I unclipped my microphone's boom arm from my desk and quietly opened my door. I walked onto the upstairs balcony and looked over, trying to see if I could spot anyone hiding or anything suspicious. I then stupidly called out, "Is anyone there?" As if somebody was actually going to answer me. For a second I thought I was just being paranoid about this whole thing, until I saw the silhouette of someone standing beneath the balcony. I panicked and ran to the closest room, which happened to be the small bathroom beside my room. The intruder must have known that I saw him, because I heard loud footsteps coming up our stairs as I locked myself inside. I was cursing under my breath that I had accidentally left my phone in my bedroom. After hearing nothing for several minutes, I finally built up enough courage and bolted out of the bathroom into my bedroom, locking the door as soon as I got in. My sister's room was right across from mine, and I noticed that her door was open, so I figured that's where the intruder must have gone. After locking myself in my bedroom, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. But just before I hit the call button, I noticed that the door to the storage room was slightly ajar. I then saw an eyeball peeking through the crevice. That's when it hit me. The intruder was not in my sister's room. He was here, with me. The terror I felt rushing through my body is something that I will never forget. True, genuine fear. I ran out of the bedroom and booked it down the stairs and out my front door. I then ran up the hill to my neighbor's house, who happened to be a police officer. I told him about the intruder hiding in my bedroom and he immediately alerted the police. Then he set out to go investigate himself, while I stayed behind with his wife. Minutes later, I ran back down to see if the intruder had been caught. When I entered my house, I saw a tall, skinny man I had never seen before. He had a gray beard and a dirty black coat. He was on the ground, being handcuffed by my neighbor. Ever since that night, I'm no longer allowed to be home alone anymore, and we have upgraded our security around the house now. My family is just happy that I wasn't hurt and are very thankful for my neighbor's bravery. I don't wish an experience like this on anyone, not even my worst enemy.
My name is Jim, and I've spent a lot, and I mean a lot, of time on the road as a trucker. Ever since trucking school, I've been driving long distances for hours every day, and even with benefits, the pay wasn't the best. While it did pay enough to financially support me and my wife, the stress it had on top of me was unbearable. Being in a truck for hours at a time really forced you to make sacrifices. Once in a while, I'd miss out on family events like birthdays and even holidays, which didn't feel good at all. On top of that, America is in desperate need for truckers to keep up with demand, which made the situation even worse. I drive for about 12 hours a day, and we couldn't stop for any reason until we reached our destination. Needless to say, I barely had any time with family. One night, I was doing my nightly routine of driving to a warehousing complex to deliver some products for major retail businesses like Target and Best Buy. I was somewhere in a rural area of Wisconsin on this long, empty road that stretched across the state. It's around 6 a.m. and I'm sipping my coffee trying to keep myself awake. Being a full-time trucker, caffeine was your best friend. If you didn't have it, you were in trouble. So there I am, driving down this road trying to keep myself awake when I see something big walk across the road from my headlights. I yell out an "oh shit" while practically slamming my brakes, coming to a complete stop. All the while, I'm cussing to myself, thinking that I just hit a person or possibly a bear. Going back, at first I did think it was a person, but then I remembered that whatever it was massive. 9 feet tall, a bulky body, and the movement it was walking looked abnormal. I step outside of the truck with my gun in hand, going to where I saw it. To my surprise, however, there was seemingly nobody on this road. Nobody walking, no roadkill, no nothing. The only thing I did see was faint tire marks on the road from me hitting the brakes too hard. I call out for anybody who might have been nearby, but got no response other than the sound of wind picking up and the truck engine. I get back inside and continue my route, managing to finish it within a few hours, but couldn't get what I had just seen off my mind. Later that same day, I call up one of my other fellow truckers and tell him about what I had just seen on the road. It turns out that he had experienced things that were similar and that it was likely a hallucination given that I was tired. Thankfully, I have a camera that sits next to the interior and was thankfully able to capture a brief second of this creature before it went out of frame. The photo will be on screen now. As you can see, the camera quality isn't that great, but it was likely due to the condensation on the front windshield. Because it was a single road with forest on opposite sides, there was a pretty good chance that it was an animal. My only question is what kind of animal 9 feet tall walks on 2 legs? I don't know if it was a person, I don't know if it was Bigfoot. One thing I do know was that I wasn't imagining it. My name is Sarah, and this happened to me a few years ago when I was a sophomore in college. I attended school in one of the most quiet and safest cities in the country. The people were nice, the crime was low, and sirens would almost never be heard. Because of this, I never really had any unsettling encounters. However, little did I know, that would all change in just one night. It was late November of 2021, and my friends and I had decided to go out to a bar to celebrate getting through finals. While the city did have low crime, it was also known to have a lot of bars and pubs. This resulted in a lot of bar fights where cops would be called. Anyway, my friends and I are at the bar taking shots and having a blast. The feeling of relief you get when finishing finals was amazing. At around 1 a.m., I told my friends that I had to go as I had to finish packing to fly back home the next day. However, they wanted to stay behind and finish their drinks, so I said my proper goodbyes and stumbled out of the bar. Because I was nearly drunk at this point, I went on my phone and decided to order an Uber back to my dorm. Thankfully, one accepted my ride request almost immediately, which wasn't common seeing that it was late. I sit down on the outside bench when I see a car pull up and someone waving their arm out. Even in my drunken state, I assumed that this had to be my Uber, even though the app showed he was still 4 minutes away. I brushed it off, assuming it was a glitch in the app, and got into the car. The very second I get into the car, I immediately noticed the red flags. For one, he didn't even say my name, and two, he never greeted me. But it was late, and I was simply too tired to care and just told him my address. As I'm in the car, I also noticed that he never put the address into his GPS, which I found odd. Figuring he must have known the area well, I let him do his thing while I just kinda kept to myself. I'd try asking him questions to make small talk, but he'd just reply with one-word answers. It eventually came to a point where I didn't even bother talking to him anymore. At one point, I look out the window and realize he was going in the complete opposite direction of my campus.
Hi, sir. My college is in the other direction.
I see him glance at the rearview mirror while giving me a nod as if he had acknowledged or understood me. However, he didn't turn around and just kept driving until he eventually pulled over beside an old office building. That was when I slowly came back to reality and knew what was going on when I start panicking. The fake Uber driver gets out and tells me to stay put while he goes around the building. I have no idea who or what he was going to get, but whatever it was definitely wasn't good. I grab my cell phone and see that I had several missed calls and messages from the real Uber driver. I knew I didn't have a lot of time, so I slowly open the door and start running while trying to keep my balance. There weren't many people in this part of the city, so I ran into a nearby shop that was still open where I called the cops. I'd say within a few minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up to the office building, but the car that was there was gone. They questioned me and made sure I described the car's description in perfect detail. I'm still unsure if they ever found the car or not, but I'd like to think that they did. A month after this incident, I saw a chilling news report about a couple who had gone missing getting into a car they thought was their Uber. The boyfriend's body was found 20+ miles away. The girlfriend survived even after suffering from severe bruises. The news said it was someone they apparently knew, but I've always wondered about that. As of now, the car has never officially been found, and the driver has never been identified. For a little bit of context, this happened on July 4th of 2019. I had just started doing both Uber and Lyft as a side hustle to make some extra money for my boyfriend and I. It wasn't the best paying job, but flexibility was through the roof, and you didn't have people telling you what to do. It's a chill and steady job, but you always had to stay on top of what you were doing. Anyway, it was the 4th of July, and I decided to do some Ubering as I knew there would be a lot of people out. Every 4th of July, my city hosts this annual music festival where thousands of people attend, so I was guaranteed to get a few people. Almost immediately, I kept getting requests left and right as people exited the venue. I decided to choose one, and within a few minutes I see a man walk up to my car. He asked if I was his Uber, to which I replied with a yes. He gets in the back seat, and right away, the strong smell of marijuana hit me like a brick. However, I knew that he had just come from the festival where smoking was bound to happen, so I wasn't complaining. Throughout the ride, this guy just stared intently at me, as if he were watching my every move. I'll be honest, it kind of made me uncomfortable, and I just wanted to get this ride over with. At one point, he stops staring at me and gets out his phone to call someone. I just tried to focus on driving, and his destination was only 10 minutes away, which was a relief in my book. As I'm driving, I hear him in the back speaking French. Now, my aunt is French, so while I understand a fair bit of French, I don't speak it. So I hear him talking, but I don't pay attention as it's rude to eavesdrop on people's conversations. That was until he said something along the lines of, "This girl I'm riding with." I felt my blood run cold as he said this, but tried to make it seem like I didn't understand him. What he was saying was unnerving. To sum it all up, he was basically saying after I had dropped him off, he was planning on, quote, snatching me up. I knew exactly what that meant, and his stop was only 5 minutes away, so I didn't have much time. I'm a 5'3" petite girl that weighs about 150 pounds. This guy was at least over 6 feet and was muscular, so there was no way I could resist him even if I tried. With very little time to spare, I get out my phone to call my boyfriend. My actual plan was to cause a scene and make up an excuse to leave. As I'm driving, I call him and ask what was up, where I immediately say, "Wait, what? She's bleeding on the floor? Tell her to stay calm, I'm coming." All the while, my boyfriend is completely confused, asking what I was talking about, etc. Thankfully, I used to be in acting school, so I was used to faking a good scene. At that point, I hung up, turned to the man, and said in a worried tone,
Sir, my grandma just hurt herself. I have to go. I'm just gonna drop you off here.
I floored it down the road before calling my boyfriend back and apologizing, telling him everything. I ended up reporting the man to Uber, but I'm not sure if they investigated it as of yet. Thank you to my boyfriend for picking up, and thank you to my aunt for teaching me French.
Back when I was in high school, I remember that one time we were going to have a planned lockdown drill. I remember that we would have these about once or twice a year. Sometimes they would even tell us like the day before that we were having a drill. I think that was so nobody would be alarmed by it and worry that it was real. So on this one day, I knew that we were having a lockdown drill during the 5th period, which was the last one of the day. The drill would usually consist of an announcement, and then the teachers turning off the lights to their classroom and locking the doors. Sometimes they would make the students huddle in the back of the classroom. Other times we would just sit in our desks. My last period of the day was usually pretty boring, but I did have one of my best friends in that class, Ryan, with me. This particular time, I remember that after 4th period, Ryan said that we should skip 5th period. At this moment, we had both completely forgot about the lockdown drill. I just remember that I knew we weren't doing much in the class, and so did Ryan. It was basically like a work day, where we would just work on homework assignments and stuff. So being immature high school kids, we decided to skip class and head home early. We went to our lockers to get our stuff, and took our time as the bells sounded, indicating that class was now in session. We were in no rush, because the school was not super strict, and we figured we could just walk right out. After we left our lockers and started down a hallway, I remember that we heard the lockdown drill announcement. That's when we both remembered it. We figured that for the drill we had better not be out in the hallway, because a hall monitor might see us and make us go to class. Plus, we were sort of far off from the nearest exit doors to the school, so we decided to go find a bathroom until the lockdown drill was over. However, on the way there we soon heard footsteps behind us. We turned a corner and didn't look back, assuming it to be a hall monitor. So we walked faster and then turned another corner. When we did this, it sounded like the footsteps behind us were going faster as well. We quickly made our way to a bathroom and then went inside. Ryan went in one of the stalls and I went in another. We didn't close the doors to the stalls, but they stayed mostly closed on their own. Then we stood on the toilets so our feet couldn't be seen on the ground. A few moments later, we heard footsteps quickly approaching outside in the hallway. Whoever it was actually entered the bathroom, which caused me to be very nervous, and I'm sure Ryan was as well. We just stood there as quiet as can be. The person then entered the bathroom very briefly and then walked out pretty fast. It was like they just looked in really quick to see if anyone else was inside of it and then continued on. Now, Ryan and I both left our hiding spots a little bit quick. Probably like 10 seconds later, we had left the stalls and started to walk out. When we left the bathroom, we noticed that the person was still in the hallway. It was a man, and he had made it almost to the other end of the hall, and he was walking facing away from us. But we realized that this likely was not a hall monitor. He was wearing just a black jacket and jeans, which is not something that a school employee would wear. After we got out into the hallway, we noticed the man stop and then start to turn around. Ryan and I both quickly went in the other direction of the hall and then turned the corner. We started walking down the next hallway very quickly, just trying to get away from the guy. As we continued though, we soon saw someone else up ahead. This was a teacher that we both recognized. It was Mr. Herbert, and he saw us and asked us why we weren't in class, saying that a lockdown drill was going on. We told him that we were sorry and would go to class. As Mr. Herbert walked with us, escorting us to our classroom, we told him about the other man in the hallway. He didn't seem to have any idea who we were talking about and said that he would find out. Soon, we got to our classroom and were led inside. And several minutes after that, there was another announcement stating that the school was now having a real lockdown. Several times they said that this was not a drill anymore. This lockdown lasted for about an hour until it finally ended and the school got out at about the same time. We learned that the man we had seen in the hallways was not supposed to be in the school, and he was arrested for trespassing after hiding in the school. Nobody knew what his intentions were. I think it's really crazy how he just happened to be there during a lockdown drill. Did he somehow know we were having a drill and did it on purpose so nobody would suspect him or notice him? I don't really think so, but it makes for a crazy coincidence. I'm also really glad that he didn't look farther into the bathroom where Ryan and I were hiding. We both learned a valuable lesson that day not to skip class, and I don't believe either of us ever skipped again after that. I remember my first ever school lockdown that I was a part of. It happened my freshman year of high school, and I was about 14 years old. I was sitting in geography class, and the teacher told us that there was a lockdown and it was not a drill. I remember that he locked the door to the classroom and then turned out the lights, and we were told not to get up from our desks. Now, nobody knew what the lockdown was for, but very quickly kids started to speculate. Nobody seemed to think that it was that serious, and most kids were just joking around. They were saying things like the school probably got locked down because a man was seen jaywalking nearby. Most people thought that the city our school was in was pretty boring and nothing crazy would happen. I personally was very curious, but I was also not too concerned and figured that it was nothing really that bad. As more time went by, us kids were talking a lot, and the teacher told us to be quiet a few times. The lockdown ended up lasting quite a long time. The more time went by, the quieter the classroom became, and the more worried I became. After over an hour, it was finally lifted. I remember feeling very relieved. We had just one class left for the day, and I remember noticing several police officers standing around in the hallways. The final class period went by pretty normal, and then we were let out of school for the day. I continued to see several police officers throughout the school, and out front were a bunch of police cars next to the buses, and more officers standing outside. I still didn't know what the lockdown had been for though, but the police presence made things feel safer, but it also made it seem like something serious was going on and they were trying to protect the students. Now, I personally did not ride the bus home because I lived in a neighborhood behind the school. It was like a 10-minute walk past the school grounds and through another neighborhood to get to mine. So after school, I went around behind it and then went past the tennis courts and football field. Then there was another field before some grass and trees and residential houses. When I made it off school property, I walked down the sidewalk past these rather large yards to the houses there. One of the yards had quite a bit of trees in it and was basically a woods. I remember that as I was walking home and passed by this, I saw a man who was sort of hiding behind a tree. I noticed him and he noticed me as well. He looked very suspicious, and I instantly wondered if he had something to do with the lockdown. I tried to just ignore him though, and I kept walking. Luckily, he did not try to follow me or anything. I was able to make it back several minutes later and then arrived home from a crazy day of school. At this point, I was home alone because both of my parents were still at work, and it was like this on most days. They'd usually get back a few hours later. So I was hanging out around the house, and like an hour after I had gotten back, I was in the kitchen, which is at the back of the house. I remember looking out the back window to the yard. Just when I did, I saw a man come into view, walking into the backyard. The yard was completely fenced in and was not very large, but we had a few trees and a shed back there. The man walked around the yard and then went behind the shed between the wooden fence. I recognized the guy to be the same one who I had seen on the way home from school. I was very creeped out by this, and I felt like the right thing to do was to call the police. So I went over and dialed 911 and reported the guy. Thankfully, he hadn't seen me looking at him through the back window. I kept an eye out back as I waited for the cops to show up. The guy stayed hidden back there between the shed and the back wooden fence the entire time. After police went out to him, he briefly tried to run away before he was caught. The police stayed at my house for a while, and my parents soon got home. I ended up finding out that that man was wanted. He had been seen inside of our school and had entered without permission. That's when the school went into a lockdown. The man fled the school and was able to get away from police. After it was confirmed that he was not on school grounds, classes resumed, but with heavy police presence. They were also searching for him in the nearby area, and that's when I had seen him behind the tree, and then in my own backyard. That was a really crazy experience, and I'm glad that everything turned out okay. I'm a school teacher, and this is the story of something that happened a few years ago. Looking back, I feel bad about what happened, and I wish I had done a better job handling the situation, but I've learned from my mistakes. So, I was teaching second period English class, and I had a class of about 20 students in it. My room is on the upper level of the school and about halfway down a hallway. This class in particular was mostly juniors and seniors and was a well-behaved class. So I was teaching the class and then was going to give them some time to work on an assignment. After I started to let them work, I realized that I needed to get more worksheets and had run out. So down the hallway from my classroom there was a printer in the teacher's lounge, and I told the class that I would print off some more. I would only be gone for a few minutes and then I left. I went down the hallway and then logged onto the computer in the lounge and found the assignment and started printing them. I was the only one in the lounge at this time. After being gone for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I heard this sound come over the school intercom. At first, I didn't know what it was, but then I realized that it was a lockdown announcement. As soon as I heard this, I remembered my students. I knew that I needed to get back to the classroom immediately, and I quickly left the teacher's lounge. I literally started running down the hallway to get back to my classroom. When I got there, I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I was very confused and didn't know why. Soon though, I figured that the students were maybe following lockdown protocol and had locked the door. I started knocking on the door and tried looking in the window, but could only see the front part of the classroom, which was empty. Still, nobody was answering. I didn't know why, and after knocking a few more times, I called out, announcing myself. Then, I saw some guy come into view who I did not recognize. This was no student, but a grown man. He looked at me and then moved out of sight. Just after that, I heard a voice at the end of the hallway. It was one of my students. He yelled my name and said that I should get away from the classroom. I went over to him at the end of the hallway and asked what on earth was going on. My student told me that while they were in the classroom, some random guy just entered out of nowhere. He demanded everybody get out of the room immediately, so they did. All the students basically ran away, and the school quickly went into a lockdown. All this took place while I was printing papers, and I was completely unaware. The students had gone to other classrooms to take cover during the lockdown, so I went with the student to another nearby teacher's classroom. Meanwhile, police entered the school as well, and were able to locate the man who was still inside of my classroom. He locked himself in and tried barricading himself inside by blocking the door. Eventually, though, the police were able to get him to come out. I don't really know what his intentions were. I felt terrible for leaving my students and then the man entering the room. Since that happened, I've never left students alone in a classroom. When I was in high school, something really strange happened one time. Early on in the school day, I remember that I was in class and I left to go to the bathroom. This was something that happened all the time. I left the classroom and started walking down the hallway. When I was nearing the bathroom, I remember that I came across this woman who I assumed to be a teacher. She looked sort of professional, and we kind of crossed paths in the hallway. I had never seen her before though, and knew most of the teachers in the school, so I thought that maybe she was a sub. When I was walking by her, she asked me where a certain teacher's room was. I can't remember the name that she said, but it was a name that I had never heard before, and like I said, I knew most, if not all, the teachers in the school. I told her that I didn't know, and then I kept walking. I made my way to the bathroom and went inside. After being in there for like a minute, I left and went back out into the hallway. Right when I started walking back though, I heard the announcement for a lockdown over the school speakers. I started walking faster to get back to my classroom. A short time later though, I ran into the woman again. She was walking in the hallway and saw me once more. When she noticed me, she said that I was not supposed to be out in the hallway. She very confidently told me that I needed to come with her and to go to her classroom for the lockdown. I started to say that I was going back to my own classroom that I had been in, but she interrupted me and said no, I had to go with her. So at that point, I just said okay and started following her. She started to walk very quickly and we went down the hallway. At first, I couldn't believe how fast she was walking, and I was trying to keep up with her. I really didn't want to go to her classroom, but she wasn't giving me an option. So we went down 2 hallways, and she kept looking back at me like she was trying to make sure that I was still following her. Then we headed to the west wing of the school, which I was very familiar with. It was really just the gym and athletics area of the school, as well as some lockers and offices. There weren't really any classrooms over there. So at this point, I was very confused and also suspicious, because I knew this woman did not have a classroom over here. The longer I followed her, the more I got a bad feeling that got worse and worse, like I shouldn't be following her and I needed to get away. Then, one time when she wasn't looking back at me, I decided to just go back. I stopped and turned around and then just started sprinting back to my classroom. As soon as I did, the woman stopped and then started to chase after me. I ran as fast as I could, and at first the woman was right on my tail, but I was a lot faster than her and quickly able to pull away. I kept going and then made it all the way back to my classroom. I started banging on the door like crazy until I was let back in. I told my teacher about what happened, and she made a call to the offices. A while later, when the lockdown was lifted, I found out that the very same woman who had tried to get me to follow her was the cause of the lockdown. She had entered the school by breaking a window to an empty classroom. I'm not sure what exactly she wanted. She was not a substitute teacher at all, but was posing as one. Why she wanted me to go with her, I do not know, but I'm really glad that I followed my instincts and ran away, and that was the only lockdown in my high school career. It was crazy, and I'm glad that nothing like that happened again. I remember one really scary experience that I had back when I was in high school. I was a sophomore, and I used to ride the bus to and from school every day. One day, there was a pretty typical day of school. I went to all my classes, and nothing strange or unusual happened. When the last bell of the day rang at 2:45 p.m., school was out and we could go home. I remember that this time was always crazy and would be a mad dash to get to the bus on time. A lot of kids went to my school, and in between every class, the hallways would be packed. So after school, it was always really tough to walk through the halls, and the buses left at just after 2:50, so you only had 5 minutes to get to them. On this day, I left my classroom and made my way to my locker. I had to go there to get something before going to the bus. This proved to be a mistake, because after literally running through the hallways and getting outside, I saw that I had missed the bus. I was really disappointed, because I lived too far away from the school to walk home. I also didn't have any good friends with cars, so I would have to wait for my mom to get off of work and give me a ride. Fortunately for me, my mom got off of work at about 3:30 or 4 p.m. usually, so I would only have to wait at the school for about an hour or so. So after calling my mom, I went back inside of the school, not really knowing what I was supposed to do. I had never missed the bus before, and had never stayed after school unless I had a sports practice. When I went back inside of the school, I saw that there were only a few students still inside, mostly just upperclassmen who drove themselves. Within probably 10 more minutes, the hallways became completely empty with just me walking down them. Now, my school did not really have any places to hang out at all. There were no study areas or couches or chairs set up. It was just hallways and classrooms really. So I figured that I would just walk the halls while I waited for my mom to come to the school. I remember that I walked the halls for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I made it towards the back end of the school, and things were completely empty. Then I heard this sound come over the school speakers. It was followed by an announcement that there was a lockdown and that this was not a drill. At first, I was very confused. I didn't know that there would be lockdowns when school was not in session, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do in this type of a situation. Obviously, I was not in class and didn't have a classroom to go to either. I looked around at the classrooms that I was passing by, and all their doors were closed and they seemed to be empty. I kept walking, thinking maybe I would just leave the school altogether. That's when I came around a corner, and way up down the hallway, I saw this guy wearing all black and a ski mask on his head. I knew that something was up there, and I quickly went back around the corner. I saw the bathrooms and quickly went inside them. Once I was there, I stopped and listened to see if the person would go near. I figured the bathrooms were really the only place I could hide for the lockdown. For a minute or two, things were pretty quiet and I didn't hear anything. Then I started to hear footsteps not far out in the hallway. They didn't really get that close though, but seemed to be a ways away. Moments later, I heard a very loud banging sound, like someone was smashing the lockers or something. I didn't know what exactly it was, but it made me feel on edge. These sounds went on for a while. Then, after about a minute or so of quiet, I heard more loud banging followed by the sound of glass breaking. It was from a ways down the hallway, but I no longer felt safe hiding in the bathroom. When things quieted down a little bit again, I knew that I needed to get out of there. I carefully went to the entrance of the bathrooms and looked out into the hallway. I didn't see anything, indicating that the sounds I heard must not have been within my sight. Then I quickly left the bathroom and ran the opposite direction to where I had heard the noises. I ran all the way until I got to the front of the school. When I got towards the lobby, I saw a police officer. He seemed a little bit surprised to see me, but I quickly told him how I had seen a guy in a ski mask and stuff. Another police officer who had entered the school told me to go outside the front door and they would handle it. I went out and there were several police cars. I waited there while the police went inside, and my mom got there a little while later. I was able to go home with her and there were a bunch of police cars still there and the police in the school at that point. I went home and heard about the rest on the news. The police had ended up finding a guy inside and catching him. The man had simply walked inside the school wearing a ski mask after hours. Obviously it was suspicious and he got reported. I guess he went around and caused a bunch of damage to the school, breaking windows to several classrooms and breaking other equipment as well. That must have been what I had heard. It was a very scary situation and I'm glad that I was able to get out of it. A couple of years ago, I had to go to the airport one night to pick up my sister. She was flying in from Detroit, and the flight was supposed to land fairly late. I think it was like 10 or 11 p.m. or something like that. However, her flight ended up being a little bit late. I arrived at the airport somewhat early, but my sister wasn't back yet. I went and parked the car in a parking lot and then went inside of the airport. When I got inside, I found the time that my sister's flight was now supposed to land, and I had about 20 more minutes to wait. So I went over and sat down. By now, the airport was very quiet. There were just a few people walking by here and there. As I sat down and waited, I remember that at one point I saw this woman randomly walking up to me. When she approached me, she asked me how to get to the city from the airport. Now, the city was like 5 minutes away, so I told her, and it was pretty easy. She walked away after that in another direction. But then the woman stopped, sort of near another sitting area, but did not sit down. I wasn't really watching her, and I mostly went on my phone. A while later, though, I looked up to see the woman just staring at me. She was standing in about the same spot. Now, she was a long distance away, but there was still no mistaking that she was looking in my direction. I found it really odd. I looked away, though, and focused my attention back on my phone. The woman continued to stare at me, though, because the next time that I looked up, she was still doing it. I didn't know why. I had thought that she had to get to the city. After all, she had asked me for directions, but now it seemed as though she just wanted to stare at me creepily. I just ignored it for the most part, though. Soon my sister's flight had landed. I got up and walked over to go wait where the bags would come out. I walked a little ways away and located it. Then I stood around for a while and waited for my sister. A short time later, she came out and got her bag, and then we started to leave. As I was walking away, I saw the woman in the airport again, still staring at me. I thought it was weird, but I just ignored it. I looked away and left the airport with my sister. We walked out of the airport and went towards the parking lot. I remember that when we got to the parking lot, I looked back and noticed that the woman who had been staring at me was now in the parking lot as well. She was walking behind us a good distance back. I was very confused now. Who was this woman? Why did she keep staring at me? And what exactly was she doing? She seemed to be walking sort of fast, and as we were walking to the car, I told my sister about the woman. The parking lot was very large, so it was kind of a long walk. As we continued, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to just ask the woman. I stopped and turned around to face her. Then I started to take a couple of steps towards her. As soon as I did though, the woman stopped suddenly. Then she turned around and sprinted away in the opposite direction into the end of the parking lot. It was so weird. I stood there watching until she went out of sight, and I had no idea what was going on. But then I just continued with my sister towards the car. We eventually got there, loaded my sister's bags in the back, and then got inside. As I started to drive away though, I was still in the parking lot, and I noticed this car come driving sort of fast into the lot. It went in front of me, and I caught a look at the driver. It was the same woman. I could not believe it. She was driving a pickup truck and drove around my car sort of recklessly. She ended up driving around and going behind it, and I left the parking lot hoping that she would keep driving the other way. But this woman screeched her tires and quickly turned around. As I left the parking lot, she started to follow me. I drove down the road, leaving the airport with the woman still behind me. Soon I turned, and the woman turned as well. She drove behind my car down the next quiet road for some time. We were about the only two cars out because it was very late at night. When I turned onto the next road, the woman made the turn very wide. She ended up going off the road and sliding a bit before hitting a tree in the grass and crashing. The crash really was not that bad, but I pulled over and stopped to call the police. After crashing, the woman got out of her truck and then went into the woods nearby. I was very confused. The police arrived at the scene fairly quick, and I told them what happened. They searched the woods and pretty quickly located the woman. We were able to go home after that. I later found out that the woman was high on drugs. She obviously should not have been behind the wheel of a vehicle, and that explained her reckless driving. That also explained why she acted so strange. Something really weird happened to me a couple of years ago. It all started for me one day when I had a flight. I travel a lot for business, so I'm very much used to flying and being in airports. One day I had a flight from Atlanta to Baltimore. I boarded and got on the plane to my seat, which was a window seat sort of towards the front. A short time after I got to my seat, a guy came up and sat next to me. He looked pretty average for the most part, and nothing about him stood out. I gave a sort of hi when he sat down, and he did the same. Then he just sat there, and neither of us said anything to each other. The flight was really not that long. It was like an hour and a half or so. The man didn't say anything the whole time. He just sort of sat there, not that I was watching him or really paying attention. When the flight landed, we all got off and went into the airport at Baltimore. I had a ride coming to get me, but it got delayed, so I had a little bit of time at the airport. I went into a coffee shop, got inside of it, got a drink, and then sat down with my laptop. After being there for nearly 30 minutes, I looked up from my laptop randomly to see the guy who had been sitting next to me on my flight. He was sitting on the other side of the coffee shop at a table. I figured that it was a coincidence and thought nothing of it really. A while later, my ride got there and I got up and left. The next day, I was still in Baltimore, and I was at a restaurant in the morning getting breakfast with a coworker. The restaurant was in the city, and we were sitting sort of in the back. There were a decent amount of other people there, but I remembered that I randomly looked up towards the front and saw the same guy. It was the man who I had seen on my flight and in the coffee shop. Plus, this man was not at the restaurant with anyone. He seemed to be by himself, and he was facing me. It seemed pretty suspicious, but it also could have just been a coincidence, but it would have been a pretty crazy one at that. I'm not a shy person or anything, so I decided to go talk to him. I was really curious as to why I kept seeing him. I got up from the table and walked right over to him. The man looked surprised to see me at first. I told the man how he sat next to me on the flight, and he was at the coffee shop with me and now here. At first, the man actually denied it, but I knew it was him. After telling him that I knew it was him, and I wasn't even talking angry or anything, I asked him sort of jokingly why he kept following me around. I remember the man paused, and then he looked at me and said, "Because I like to stalk people." Obviously at first I thought he was joking, but the way that he said it was very serious. The man then said that he had been watching me since the flight everywhere I went. I thought that it was really weird what he was saying, and I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I said, "Okay, well, you can stop following me around now." The man did not say anything. His behavior was very strange to say the least. I just walked back over to my coworker and then told him all about what happened. None of us knew what to make of this strange man. Before leaving, we looked over and the guy was still there. When we walked past him to leave, I stopped and said to him, I'm leaving now, so don't follow me. I was careful to look behind me after getting onto the sidewalk outside of the restaurant. I made sure the guy wasn't following me, and he didn't seem to. Later on in the day though, we had work stuff to do, and I was busy. I pretty much forgot about the guy who had been following me, and I also didn't see him. That night, I got back to my hotel room and went to bed at about 10 p.m. However, before I fell asleep, I heard a noise. I was just lying down in the bed, and all the lights were off. The only sound to that point was the very quiet noise of the TV, which the volume was barely above mute. I then heard a knock from my hotel door. I really didn't know why anybody would be knocking on my door so late. Then I heard a voice. I couldn't make it out at first, because whoever it was not talking very loud. I got up from my bed and walked a little closer. That's when I heard it clearly. It was a man's voice, the same man who had been following me around. He was saying my name and then telling me to open the door. The way he said it was really creepy. It was almost like he was playing a game. I wasn't sure what to do at first. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, the same guy was there. Then I decided to call the front desk and report him. As the guy was still in the hallway outside my door, I called and let the hotel know what was going on. Then I did my best to ignore the man. I couldn't sleep, and every so often he would knock on the door again. I just sat on the bed and hoped that the guy wouldn't do anything crazy. A while later, I heard some other voices in the hallway. Soon the knocking stopped and the man was gone. After that, I was able to go to bed. The next morning, I found out that the police got involved. The man was knocking on my door and hotel staff asked him to leave. He did leave, only to come back about an hour later. At that point, the hotel called police on him. That time, the cops got the guy to leave. I didn't see the man for the rest of my trip, and thankfully, I haven't seen him since. I don't know why that guy followed me. It seems really bizarre to do that, and maybe something was wrong with him. I just hope that I never see him again. Last year, I had to pick up a friend from the airport. I didn't really mind it too much because I don't live that far away. It's maybe a 15-minute drive. The most annoying part really was that the flight landed at 6 a.m., so I had to get up pretty early. When I drove to the airport, things already seemed pretty busy there. The airport usually is. I went on one of those long roads where you pick up or drop off people. Cars pull over really fast and then leave. It can be kind of hectic sometimes, and it certainly was on this day. So I found a spot by where my friend said she was coming out. There was a car a little ways in front of me, and right after I pulled over, a car came and pulled up behind me pretty close. I texted my friend that I was there, and just moments later, I saw her come out of the doors. She came up to my car and put her bags in the back. Then she got inside the passenger's door. Right as I was about to put the car into drive, this car came up really fast and then turned right in front of my car. It parked extremely crooked, halfway in front of my vehicle and halfway to the side of it. It was the most careless parking job I've ever seen. There was another car parked a little ways in front of me, so I guess they wanted to squeeze in between us. The car stopped and someone got out of the passenger's door and headed towards the airport. The driver stayed in. I was a little bit annoyed at the borderline reckless move. However, I figured it must be a quick drop-off and they would be on their way. Except, the person did not leave. Meanwhile, the car behind me wasn't leaving either. I was completely boxed in. I sat there just waiting for over a minute. I didn't know what the person in the car in front of me was doing. There was a guy in the driver's seat and he appeared to just be sitting there. I honked at him so I could get out. That's when I saw the man who was behind the wheel look over at me and give me the bird. This made me real angry, and I honked again loudly. However, he did not leave. He just sat there. Just then, though, the car behind me finally started to leave. After it did, I backed up and turned to go around the man who was parked crooked. However, just after I passed his car, I saw he suddenly backed up and then started to go forward. He was now driving behind me. This enraged me even more. It meant he literally could have left whenever, but he was carelessly blocking me in for no reason. As I drove out of the airport, the car followed. He got really close to my back bumper, and I was a little worried that he might try something. That's when my friend had a good idea. She said that if the guy followed us out of the airport to go to a police station. I didn't know where one was, so she looked one up on her phone. As we left the airport and went on another road, the guy behind me did as well. He was still following very close, and I had a bad feeling about it. We got the directions to the police station and started following them. Over the next several minutes of driving, there were several times where I was sure the guy was going to bump my car with his. Thankfully, he didn't though, but he got very close. Eventually, we made it to the police station and turned into it. The man did not. However, he slowed down significantly and yelled something out of his window, but I couldn't hear it. Then he screeched away, squealing his tires in the process. We reported him to the police, but I'm not sure if anything could really be done. Then we drove back. I dropped my friend off and was able to get back to my place without a problem. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since, but each time I go to the airport, I think about that crazy experience. This happened several years ago. For some background, I'm a female, and I was flying back home one time. I remember that I had visited a friend who lived in another state. I got to the airport and was waiting for my flight to board. When I arrived, it was about an hour before boarding time, so I had some time. I sat down in the area where my flight was waiting. After a little while of sitting down, I decided to get up and get something to drink. I found one of the airport stores and then went inside of it. When I was there, this man walked up to me. He had long dark hair, a slight beard, and was on the larger side. He came up to me and said hi. I didn't know who the guy was, but I said hi back to him. That's when he said I was good friends with his sister. I had never seen this guy before, and I asked him who his sister was. He paused for a moment and then said Molly, but I didn't know anyone named Molly, and I told him that. The guy must have me confused with somebody else. He said he was sure that he knew me. From that point on, the guy wouldn't leave me alone. He started asking me about where I was headed and when my flight was. I told him because I didn't see the harm in it, and I was polite. He asked me if I wanted to get some food at the restaurant with him before my flight, and I said no thanks. After I got the water that I wanted at the shop, I went and checked out. The guy was basically following me the whole ways. I remember I asked him where he was going, and he said his flight was for California, I think. Then I told him to have a nice flight and goodbye. I then started to walk back over to the boarding area. The guy did say bye to me, and I made it back without him following me or anything. I sat back down and continued to wait for my flight. I remember a while later, right before my flight was about to board, I saw the guy again. He came up and walked over towards me. I was confused as to why he was there. Then he told me that he was going on my flight. I really couldn't believe it. In fact, I didn't believe him. I was so confused that I didn't say anything at all. He went on to say that his flight got canceled, and so he bought a ticket on my flight. The only thing I said was why. He said because he wanted to. I had no idea who this guy was or why he thought he could just do whatever I did. He sat down next to me, but I got up. I told him that I was sorry, but I was not interested in hanging out with him or anything. The guy didn't say anything. I went and stood closer to the counter waiting to board the plane. Eventually, we boarded. Thankfully, I did not have a seat next to the guy. I was really worried about that. He was sitting way in the back, and I was a lot closer to the front. The flight took off, and we flew back to my hometown. I had actually forgot about the guy during the flight, because I watched a movie and I also fell asleep briefly. After getting off the plane and walking through the airport again though, he caught up with me. He tapped me on the shoulder, and when I turned around and saw him, I remembered, giving me a bad feeling. The guy then asked me if he could stay at my place because he didn't have a hotel or anything yet. I told him no. As we walked through the airport, the guy followed me. I had a friend coming to pick me up, and I called to let her know that I was there. When the guy continued to follow me as I approached the doors, I told him to stop following me or I would report him. He didn't say anything. When I left the airport though, he was still there. At that point, I just took off running. I located my friend's car and sprinted to it and got inside. I told her to quickly drive away. I looked back and saw the man actually running in our direction. My friend didn't know what was going on obviously, but when she saw the guy running towards us in the mirror, she left. We were able to safely get away before he reached us, and I told my friend the whole story. Since then, I haven't seen the man. Looking back, that was just a really crazy situation. I have no idea why that guy seemed so obsessed with me. I had truly never seen him before that day. The fact that he actually bought a ticket on my flight blows my mind. I'm glad that I haven't seen him since then. A few years ago, I had a flight back home. I was flying from Dallas to Chicago, and the flight back was pretty nice. The story really begins after we landed. My flight landed sort of late, at about midnight or so. Afterwards, I walked through the airport and then waited for my ride, which didn't take too long. I got picked up at the airport by my friend, and after driving me back, she dropped me off at my apartment. It wasn't too long of a drive because I lived fairly close. After getting back, I went inside. I was tired from the long day of travel, and it was really late, so I pretty much just got ready for bed at that point. Afterwards, I looked on my phone before getting in bed, and I saw that I had a missed call. I didn't recognize the number and was wondering why somebody would call me so late. Just as I was looking at it, they called again. I was curious, so I decided to answer it. I said hello, and on the other end at first, I just heard breathing. Then, I heard a woman speak. She said that she was on my flight from Dallas to Chicago, and now she was outside of my apartment. I didn't know if I should take this serious or not, but I was very confused to say the least. I asked her who she was, because I did not recognize the voice. The woman did not tell me. She just said that she wanted me to let her inside, or she would break in. Then she hung up. This really creeped me out. I went over to my front door and looked out of it, but didn't see anybody. I had no clue if this was some kind of a prank or what. I looked out into the hallway both directions, but still saw nothing. For a while, I thought that the woman was going to call me again. I was pretty nervous, and I wasn't tired anymore. I stayed up for several hours, and nothing happened. At that point, I decided to just block the number. After that, I was able to go to sleep. The next morning, I got up, and things were fine. Nobody had broken in or anything. However, when I left my apartment, I saw that there was a sticky note on my door. I looked at it, and it was simply a frowning face. I thought that had to be left by whoever that woman was. I was very creeped out. However, nothing more happened after that. I didn't get any more strange calls or people at my door. I don't live in that apartment anymore either. That remains a sort of mystery to me of who did that and why. I'm hoping that it was just a prank, but I really don't know.
This happened after a long and boring day at school. While returning back to my house, I was pretty excited, as it was a Friday, which meant no school the next day. While approaching my house, I noticed that our garage door was left open and the lights were on. My dad had left for a business trip that same day, and I figured that he must have left in a hurry and had forgotten to close the door. I didn't give it much thought and switched off the lights and closed the garage door. I played some video games and watched a movie. My mom had to go to her friend's house for whatever reason, so I had the house all to myself, and it was nighttime. I went to the kitchen to make myself a drink, and I saw that the garage lights were switched on again. I figured my mother must have gone in there for some reason and had left the lights on, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling that something was wrong. I went into the garage again, and right away, I saw that every drawer in my dad's workshop area had been opened, and many of his tools were laying around. Whoever was in his garage was surely looking for something. I figured that it had to have been my mom, but when she briefly stopped by the house earlier that evening, I didn't notice her going to the garage, and she wasn't there for very long either. I was honestly creeped the hell out by this point. I didn't see anybody else in the garage, so I went back into my house, making sure to lock the door behind me. As I was watching TV, from behind me, I heard the knob on the door that led into the garage start to violently rattle. In a panic, I got up from the couch and stared in horror at the door. After the person on the other side failed to open it, they let out a loud scream and began to viciously pound on the door. I quickly ran upstairs to grab my cell phone, and then I got it into my head that I needed to exit the house before calling the police. I guess with all the adrenaline running through my body, I didn't notice that all the loud bashing noises from downstairs had come to a stop. Upon coming back down, I immediately made for the front door, which I had to go through the living room to get to. Looking back, I probably should have went through the back. I was very lucky, because when I entered the living room, I saw the intruder. He was a very big man and had an axe in his hands, which he had taken from my dad's workshop. The man had his back to me and appeared to be looking behind an armchair in the far corner of the living room. I'm guessing that the TV, which was still playing the movie, masked my footsteps as I entered the room. I didn't go back upstairs. That would have been stupid. I turned around and hastily made my way to the back door. After running a short distance, I called the cops and reported the incident. They informed me that they would be there in 5 minutes. I then went to my neighbor's house, who was a really good friend of my father's, and waited there until the cops showed up. To make a long story short, the police searched the whole house, and just as I feared, the man was nowhere to be found. They discovered that the intruder had smashed through the door in the garage with the axe. It was kind of a flimsy door, and it would have taken him a few good swings to break through it. I called my mom, and she came back as soon as possible. After she heard about the incident, she hugged me and was grateful that nothing had happened to me. I honestly don't know if my dad had forgotten to close the garage door, or if the intruder somehow opened it. But regardless, whenever you leave your house, always double check to make sure your doors are locked and secured, because it's a scary world we live in. A little background information to set the scene. I live in a house that is directly across the street from a cul-de-sac. Beyond the cul-de-sac is the entrance to a forest that stretches on for miles. The woods are pretty dense in terms of trees and bushes. When I was younger, I would love to ride my bike or scooter down various pathways through the forest and back to my house. Since it was a short distance, there was a bit of a downhill slope. One day when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, I was riding my bike down the street that led to the cul-de-sac. There was multiple openings at the end of the cul-de-sac where you could clearly see the forest from the street. I was distracted by someone standing in the woods off in the distance. I wasn't paying attention, and I accidentally ran into a small car that was parked outside one of the houses. It was kind of embarrassing, but thankfully I wasn't injured or anything. The person began pacing back and forth frantically, like they were trying to decide on something. It was then that I noticed that this person was wearing what looked like a black raincoat. He didn't have his hood up, so I could clearly see his head. He was a balding middle-aged man. And I'm not entirely sure, but I think he was talking to himself. I was a bit weirded out, so I hid behind the car that I ran into, and lifted my head just high enough over the trunk so I could still see what was happening. It was then that I saw something in his hand that seemed to give off a bright shine every time he walked under a ray of light coming through one of the overhead trees. It was a knife, and from where I was, I could see that the knife appeared to be stained red. I gathered up my bike and was about to head straight back to my house. When I looked back to where the dude was, I froze. The man had stopped pacing and was now staring right at me. I panicked and dropped down behind the car, letting go of my bike, which made a loud metallic clank as it collided with the street. Not knowing what to do, I waited for about 30 seconds before peeking my head back out from behind the car. The person was still standing there, just staring. Then suddenly, the person started sprinting towards me, letting out a deranged scream, followed by something that I will never forget as long as I live. I launched myself back onto my bike and started pedaling home as fast as I could. When I made it to the end of the street, I turned back and saw the psycho walking back into the woods. When I got back home for dinner, I didn't say anything about it to my parents or my sister. I was afraid that they wouldn't let me ride down the cul-de-sac anymore. I guess being a dumb kid, that was more important than my own safety. It's been about 10 years, and we still live in the same house, and haven't heard about any kidnappings or murders happening around here in the past decade. So I'm not entirely sure what that person was doing out there. Maybe he was just some mentally unhinged nutcase off his meds. Maybe he was a crazed drug addict. Whatever the case may be, I'm glad I didn't meet him and his knife up close and personal. I used to date this guy named Jake. I met him through mutual friends, and at first things were okay between us. But there was something about him that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Jake seemed to just kind of show up around places where I would be, without any kind of setup. This happened to me more than a few times, mind you. It was like I was being stalked by my own boyfriend. He gave off this weird vibe that would have been assigned to anyone not to date this person. But to be honest, I wasn't in a very good place in my life at the time. I was very depressed, had a bit of a drug problem, and had very low self-esteem. He knew that, so when he pursued me, I went with it. We ended up dating for about 2 years. About halfway into the relationship, he went to jail, and I ended up having to move in with my parents. When I would make the 2-hour drive to visit him, I began to notice that his personality took a turn for the worst. He became very possessive, and noticeably more uncomfortable in his own skin. The times I couldn't be there, since I always couldn't make that drive to see him, seemed to push him closer and closer to his breaking point. I think something happened to him while he was in jail. When he finally got out, I eventually moved back in with him, and that's when he took a nosedive into hard drugs. One night we had some people over at the house, and he was really overdoing it, if you know what I mean. He kind of went off into his own world. Even when our friends left, he really didn't seem to notice or care. I went upstairs to go to sleep, while he stayed downstairs. I laid down in the bed, and shortly after, I fell asleep. Suddenly, my entire body was shaking. I opened my eyes to see Jake violently shaking me. I looked at him, and I immediately became terrified. His eyes were bloodshot and crazed, and he was panting like some kind of rabid dog. "Where is it?" he barked. I asked him what he was talking about, and he seemed angered by this. "Where is it?" he asked again more aggressively. At this point, my initial fear had passed, and I then became very annoyed at the situation. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, and then I rolled over in bed and tried to go back to sleep. He went back downstairs, and the next thing I know, I hear glass smashing and things being thrown around. I get up to see what's going on, and he comes barreling up the stairs and shoves me to the ground, coming down on top of me and pinning me to the floor. Mind you, I'm only 5'5", 130 pounds, and he's 6'4", almost 200 pounds. I had my phone in my hand, and he pried it away from me. At this point, I'm now horrified all over again. It was like something alien had taken him over. He was looking at me like how a lion stares down their prey. He looked into my eyes, and after a long silence, he said, "Don't tell anyone. Your phone, they can track it. Everyone knows you're here. They can't know you're here." At this point, I start struggling, trying to get away from him. He grips me harder and says 3 words I'll never forget. "I killed someone." After a few seconds, he suddenly lets go of me, bursts into tears, and runs away. I put on some clothes and book it out of the house, running as fast as I could to my car. When I got in and turned the key, I glance over to see him running straight at me. I scream, and before I could put my car into reverse and back out of the driveway, he forced open the hood of my car and pulled something out of the engine. At this point, I realized that I had left my phone in the house. Once he had got done tampering with my car's engine, he shut the hood and left, taking whatever he had pulled out with him inside. I sat there in the car, unsure of what to do. I could see him through the downstairs window. He was looking all around for God knows what. He was so focused on keeping me there and finding whatever he was looking for. As I sat in the car, I started sobbing. The car was still running, but I don't know what he pulled out of it. I didn't want to drive away and have the car break down, so I decided to make a run for it. The neighbors were close by, and all I had to do was make it to next door quickly. I waited for him to be out of sight. I then opened the car door and bolted. As I was running, I heard the sound of shoes on pavement from behind me. I turn, and I see him chasing me. His bloodshot eyes were fixated on me. I was now screaming for my life. I ran to the neighbors and beat on the door. When they opened it, I rushed inside and locked the door behind me. I then braced myself for Jake to slam into the door, but he didn't. I looked out the peephole, and he was nowhere in sight. The neighbors let me use their phone, and I called my parents to come get me. I left my belongings and my phone at Jake's place, and technically the car that I was using was in his name, so I left that there too. I have never spoken to him again. I shudder when I think about his bloodshot eyes staring me down, and the way he chased me down that day. That was the wake-up call I needed to get my together. I called the police and told them what he had said to me, but I never heard any follow-up. I figured that it might have been just the drugs talking, but if I had stayed with him, there's no telling what could have happened to me. My family planned a summer trip to visit my aunt and younger cousin Fred, who was 13 at the time. My aunt's house is a quiet country home surrounded by fields and dirt roads. There were porches on both the front and back of the house, making it look authentically country. Even though we were surrounded by the beauty of the countryside, it didn't take long for Fred and I to become bored. The sun was beginning to go down, the light was dimming, and the temperature was perfect for a stroll. Fred and I decided to take this time as an invitation to sneak out through the field behind the house. The field ended into a dirt road. We walked less than a half a mile, and we could see the dim lights at the parking lot of a small canning factory. By the way it smelled, I figured they probably canned boiled peanuts. We actually walked up to the back of the plant, where they park delivery trucks for the night. The trucks are the type that have double doors on the back of them, and you only have to open one side to get in. Fred walked up to the back of one of the parked trucks and pulled on the door, and surprisingly, it was unlocked. We climbed right into the back. It was dark and empty. I shut the second door behind us, but I didn't close it all the way, leaving a small crack for a tiny bit of light to come through. Lucky for us, I had my cell phone with me, and I could use the flashlight. Of course, like every idiot teenager, we thought it would be cool to graffiti our own initials on the back of the truck. After we had our fun, and as we were just about to exit the truck, Fred caught the glimpse of someone through the opening in the door. He stopped in his tracks and became totally frozen, giving me a chance to look as well. I could see that a figure was walking across the parking lot opposite the truck. I thought this could have been a security guard. Fred started freaking out and hyperventilating. The man must have heard him because in that moment, he turned around and started walking in our direction. I put my hand over Fred's mouth and we both crouched down against the closed door. My head was flat against the door, with one eye looking through the slight opening. The man was now standing right outside the crack between the doors, only mere feet from us. How in the world he never opened the door, I'll never know. He was looking right through the opening in the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I could see his nasty, rotten teeth as he opened his mouth and coughed. Unbelievably, he never touched the doors. He just turned around and started walking towards the entrance of the plant. That's when we made a break for it. With a loud thump, my cousin's feet hit the asphalt. Before I jumped down, we both saw the creepy man standing at a short distance. He was wearing a black hoodie and ripped jeans. There was a large scar on his face from his mouth to his right eye, and I could see his broken teeth twisted into a grin. His appearance was so unsettling that I still have never forgotten about it to this day. I leapt down to the ground from the back of the truck, and that's when the man pulled out a knife. Before I could even get the word "run" out of my mouth, Fred was out of there like a bat out of hell. I truly didn't know Fred could sprint that fast as he left me behind. I then booked it, and the man took off after me. I could hear him growling and yelling profanities at us from behind me. We made our way into the fields, and it wasn't long before I could see the lights of my aunt's house in the distance. I took one last look behind me, and all I could see was a dark hooded figure standing among the tall blades of grass, watching us flee. And even though it had become considerably darker, I swear I could see the man's deranged smile from under his hood. I made it to the back of the porch alongside Fred, who was gasping for breath. We told our family everything that happened, leaving out the part about us being in the back of the truck, for obvious reasons. My aunt called the police, and after about a half an hour an officer came. They found the man. It turns out he was a former employee of the factory who had been let go because of his severe mental issues. Ever since then, I never go out after dark unarmed. Who knows what would have happened if that lunatic had opened up those doors and found us. Back in the spring of 1999, when I was 16, my family moved to a small mountain town in Colorado. I quickly became friends with the only other kid my age who lived nearby. His name was Kyle. One evening, shortly before the start of summer, Kyle and I had been wandering through the woods and found a narrow river that flowed across the property. Being bored kids, our immediate reaction was to jump in and swim upstream and have fun. We kept at it until sundown. But instead of packing it in, set them down on the riverbank and keep swimming. After maybe another 10 minutes, Kyle became very quiet and gestured for me to swim closer to him. When I was within arm's reach, he whispered to me, "Look over my shoulder, towards the tree line. I think someone is there pacing back and forth." I would have immediately dismissed his words as just him jumping at shadows, but the genuine concern in his voice made me pause. I glanced over to where he had indicated and scanned the tree line for a few wary seconds, but didn't notice anything moving. I said something to the effect of, "It's either an animal or just shadows, dude. No one has any business being on this property, and I doubt anyone else knows about this section of river." That didn't seem to put Kyle's mind at ease at all. He turned back around and looked towards the tree line again, and for a moment, there was complete silence. "Did you just hear that?" Kyle asked. I told him that I didn't hear anything. Kyle asked if I would walk up to the bank with him and investigate to see if there was anything there. I told him if we got out, we wouldn't want to go back in, and I kinda wanted to swim some more. Kyle didn't respond, but instead swam out towards the bank and climbed out of the water. I continued to swim like a moronic kid, oblivious to the notion that me diving forward into the water in the dark could have resulted in me caving my head in on a hidden rock or something. I'm not sure how much time passed before I suddenly began to feel very alone. I turned back towards the bank, and I didn't see Kyle anywhere. Both of the flashlights were still untouched, lying in the sand by our shoes. I called out for Kyle as I climbed out of the water, but he didn't seem to respond. I picked up my flashlight and scanned the trees with the beam. I called out for Kyle again, half convinced that he was just messing with me. But again, silence was the only response. I took a few careful steps into the woods, around the area that Kyle had pointed out earlier. I was getting ready to call his name out again when I noticed him. He was standing facing away from me several yards away, staring deeper into the forest. I walked over to him, but he didn't turn towards me as I moved closer. I shouted something along the lines of, "Kyle, why aren't you answering me?" I reached out to grab his shoulder, but before I could, he slowly raised one hand and pointed a trembling finger towards the shadows. "Can you see that? What is that?" I shined the flashlight at his face. I could see that he was bone white, and his eyes were as wide as sewer covers. I barely noticed it at the time, but one detail I'll never be able to forget was a single droplet of blood running down from his nose. I turned the light in the direction that he was pointing and asked, "What?" It was like time had stopped. My flashlight beam caught a pair of legs in dark pants, and I felt my heart skip a beat. The flashlight felt extremely heavy in that moment, and if I were in any other circumstances, I would have snapped the beam light upwards immediately. But all I could do was slowly raise my arm, as if I was fighting gravity itself. The legs simply kept going, then the torso appeared. When my flashlight traveled all the way up past its chin, it had a very wide and gummy smile. It was the scariest face I had ever seen. I flipped my and dropped my flashlight. I collided with Kyle as I turned, and we both hit the ground. I screamed for him to run. Then I took off like a maniac back down the river and back at the path we had taken, abandoning everything else, including my friend. I lost count of how many times I tripped. It was at least 6, maybe as many as 10. But I continued to leap back to my feet and kept sprinting, using only the starlight through the overhead branches and the distant glow of indoor lights where my house was to navigate. I didn't say anything to Kyle. I was certain that I could hear him only a few steps behind me, crashing around the sticks just as loudly as I was. I shot through the garage door into the kitchen, screaming bloody murder. My arms and face were bruised and bloody, and at some point, I had lost one of my sneakers. But I barely registered that as I cried for my parents to call the police. I looked around behind me for Kyle, but he wasn't there. Assuming that he had run back to his own house, I asked my parents to call his parents after the police arrived. I was shaking so badly when the cops came, and they seemed concerned that I might have been overdosing on something. Then we got the phone call from Kyle's parents, and they were checking to see if Kyle had come home with me. And the police called in a team of dogs and extra men to scan the area. They located our belongings by the river, but they found no trace of Kyle or the stranger. The search lasted months, and over 100 miles worth of forest was searched, but no trace of him was ever found. To this day, Kyle has never been seen again. There was media coverage at the time, but given that we were in a small town where people get lost in the woods often, I don't know how far the story spread. What is probably the most heartbreaking is that Kyle's family is still without any answers. I live with the guilt of his disappearance every day. I doubt that I'll ever forgive myself for not stopping to make sure that he was behind me. To this day, I'm sure I can recall the sound of his footsteps behind me as I ran, so I don't know at what point he stopped, or if the thing grabbed him. Another thought has crossed my mind numerous times. What if it wasn't Kyle that I heard